She pressed her lips against his before she even said hello. 1 second. 2 seconds. Long enough to feel his hands tense at his sides instead of reaching for her. Long enough to know something was wrong. Isabella pulled back, and the man staring down at her was not Nathan. Same face, same jaw, same dark eyes. But a completely different storm behind them. The hallway went silent, and Adrian DeLuca, the most feared man in Boston, looked at her with something no one had ever given him before. Pure, unguarded surprise. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Isabella Romano had been rehearsing this moment for 3 weeks. She had practiced what she would say. She had picked out her dress, a deep burgundy wrap dress that Nathan said brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. She had spent 40 minutes on her hair, and another 20, convincing herself that meeting the DeLuca family was not as terrifying as every instinct in her body insisted it was. Nathan had tried to prepare her. They're intense, he had told her the week before, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone choosing words like a man stepping across ice. My family doesn't do casual. They're going to watch you. They're going to ask questions. Just be yourself, Isa. That's the only thing that's ever going to work with them. Be myself, she had repeated. Got it. Be myself in front of the most powerful crime family in New England. Easy. Nathan had laughed, and that laugh, easy and warm and genuine, was one of the reasons she had said yes when he first asked her to dinner 6 months ago. He had been different from any man she had ever dated. Patient. Unhurried. The kind of man who texted her just to ask about her day and actually listened when she answered. She hadn't expected to fall for him. She also hadn't expected that falling for him would eventually lead her to the doorstep of the DeLuca mansion on a cold October evening, staring up at a building that looked less like a family home and more like something that belonged on the cover of a Gothic novel. The mansion sat at the end of a private road lined with iron fencing and security cameras that didn't even try to be subtle. 3 stories, stone facade. The kind of architecture that said old money without bothering to whisper it. Every window was lit from the inside with warm amber light that should have felt welcoming, but somehow felt like a warning instead. Isabella adjusted the strap of her purse and told her hands to stop trembling. Nathan had texted her 20 minutes ago. Running 5 minutes behind. There's a situation at the warehouse. Go inside, I'll be right there. Maria will let you in. Maria, she knew, was Nathan's aunt. A small, sharp-eyed woman he had described with equal parts affection and wariness. She loves deeply, he'd said, and she judges faster than anyone I've ever known. Great. Perfect. Exactly what she needed. The housekeeper, a quiet older woman named Rosa, who had smiled at Isabella with what might have been either warmth or pity, had taken her coat, offered her a glass of sparkling water, and told her that Mr. DeLuca is just down the hall. Isabella had assumed that meant Nathan. She had followed the sound of footsteps down the wide marble-floored hallway, the heels of her boots clicking against the stone in a rhythm that felt too loud, too obvious, like announcing her arrival to a house that was already watching. And then she had seen him. His back was half turned toward her, but the line of his shoulders was Nathan's line. The dark hair curling slightly at the collar. The height, 6'2", the same as Nathan. That same athletic build she had learned to recognize in the way a person learns to recognize a sound in a familiar silence. She had felt a rush of relief so powerful, it had loosened something tight in her chest. He made it. Hey, she had said softly, stepping forward. I thought you said 5 minutes. He had started to turn toward her, and she had closed the distance without thinking, the way you do when you love someone, when the space between you feels like something that doesn't need to exist. And she had pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was meant to be brief and warm and familiar. It was none of those things, because the moment her lips touched his, everything stopped. Not the way things stop in movies with swelling music and slow motion. It stopped the way things stop in reality, Sudden and sharp and deeply wrong, like stepping off a curb you didn't see and feeling your stomach drop before you understand what's happening. His hands did not come to her waist. His body did not soften toward her the way Nathan's always did. He went very, very still, and the stillness was its own kind of answer. Isabella pulled back. She looked up. The face was Nathan's face. The same strong jaw, the same dark eyes framed by lashes that were almost unfair on a man. The same slight scar at the left temple that Nathan had told her came from a bike accident when he was 8 years old. But the eyes. Nathan's eyes were warm. Nathan's eyes were the kind that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, that softened when she talked about her mother, that went distant in that particular way when he was thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. The eyes staring down at her right now were none of those things. They were dark and still and measuring in a way that made her feel like she had just walked into a room with a locked door behind her. "You're not Nathan," she said. It wasn't a question. The certainty of it hit her like cold water. "No," he said. His voice was deeper than Nathan's. Not by much, just enough that the difference registered in her chest before her mind could process it. "I'm not." The hallway seemed to compress around them. Isabella was acutely aware of every inch of space, or the lack of it, between them. She stepped back and her heel caught slightly on the edge of an area rug, and she would have stumbled if his hand hadn't moved with a speed that startled her, catching her elbow with a firm, steady grip that steadied her before she even fully understood she was falling. He released her immediately, like she was something that had burned him, or something he was choosing not to hold. "Adrian," said a voice from the end of the hallway. Isabella turned. A woman stood in the arched doorway that led to what looked like a dining room, small, sharp-featured with silver hair, pulled back in an elegant knot, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She was wearing a dark green dress and an expression that was entirely unreadable. "Maria DeLuca, I see you've met Isabella," the woman said. Her voice was perfectly controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been amusement or might have been assessment, and Isabella genuinely could not tell which. "We met," Adrian said. He said it simply, no elaboration, no explanation of what had just happened, as though a woman had not just kissed him in his own hallway, under the impression that he was his twin brother. Isabella felt heat crawling up her throat. "I'm so sorry," she said, and she didn't know whether she was talking to Adrian or to Maria or to whatever dignity she had walked into this house carrying, which now felt like it was lying in pieces on the marble floor. I didn't realize Nathan texted me. He said he would be right here, and I saw him from behind, and I assumed—" "Isabella?" Adrian's voice cut through her explanation quietly, not unkindly. She stopped. "There's no need to explain," he said. And then, with the measured, unhurried calm of a man who was either entirely unaffected or entirely in control of the fact that he wasn't, he turned to Maria and said, "Is father in the study?" "He's waiting," Maria said. "Tell him I'll be there in a moment." Maria looked between the two of them for exactly 2 seconds. Isabella counted, and then she disappeared through the archway without another word. The hallway was quiet again. Adrian looked back at Isabella. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he was studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Not the way you can't read a blank face, but the way you can't read handwriting in an unfamiliar language. There was something there. She just didn't have the tools to understand what it was. "How long have you been with Nathan?" he asked. It was not the question she expected. 6 months, she said. Almost 7. He nodded slowly. He talks about you. She didn't know what to do with that. He talks about you too. Something shifted in his expression. So slight, she might have imagined it. I doubt that. He said you were the most complicated person he'd ever met, she said, and then immediately wanted to pull the words back, because that was not a polished thing to say to a man you had just accidentally kissed in his own home, standing in his hallway, still recovering from the embarrassment of mistaking him for someone else. But Adrian DeLuca did something she did not expect. He almost smiled. Not fully. Not the easy, warm kind of smile Nathan gave her. Just a slight movement at the corner of his mouth. Something that might have been amusement, or recognition, or something else entirely. "That sounds like Nathan," he said. And then the front door opened behind her. Nathan. DeLuca walked in with his coat still on and his phone in his hand, and the slightly harried energy of a man who had been putting out fires, and he pulled up short the moment he saw the two of them standing in the hallway. His eyes moved between Isabella and Adrian. Something crossed his face, quick, almost imperceptible. A flicker that might have been concern or recognition, or the particular alertness of someone trying to read a room they had just walked into. "Isa," he said. He came forward and kissed her cheek, and she leaned into him with a gratitude that was probably more obvious than she wanted it to be. "I'm sorry the situation at the warehouse took longer than I thought." He looked at Adrian. "Brother." "Nathan." Adrian's voice was even, neutral. Whatever that almost smile had been, it was gone now. "I see you've met Isabella." "We met," Adrian said again. The exact same words as before, with the exact same inflection, and Nathan, who had known his twin brother for 34 years, went very still. He looked at Isabella. She looked back at him. "The hallway," she said quietly. "I came in through the hallway and I made a mistake." Nathan's jaw tightened for exactly 1 second. Then, something deliberate moved through his expression, a conscious choice to reset, to smooth over, to not address it here in the hallway with his brother 3 feet away. "Okay," he said. He said it lightly, like it was nothing, like it was a small thing. But he didn't look at Adrian again, and his hand, when he found Isabella's, was holding on just slightly too tight. "Let's go in. Everyone's waiting." The DeLuca family dinner was unlike any family dinner Isabella had ever attended. She had grown up in a house in South Boston, where dinner meant her mother's pasta, mismatched chairs, and arguments about everything from sports to politics that escalated and dissolved in the same breath. It was loud and warm and chaotic in the way that only close families can be, where conflict and love occupied the same space without apology. The DeLuca table was nothing like that. It was large enough to seat 12 set with china that Isabella suspected cost more than her monthly rent, and occupied by 6 people who seemed to conduct the majority of their communication through silence, meaningful looks, and the kind of precision conversation that told her every word at this table had been chosen deliberately for as long as any of them could remember. At the head of the table sat Dominic DeLuca. Nathan had warned her about his father. "He's not cruel," Nathan had said. "But he's never been wrong about a person in his life, and he knows it. He'll look at you, and you'll feel like he's already decided something, and you won't know what it is, and that's by design." Dominic DeLuca was in his late 60s, still powerfully built with silver hair, and eyes so dark they were almost black. He had looked at Isabella when Nathan introduced her, and Nathan had been right. It was the look of a man who had already reached a conclusion, and was simply watching you confirm it. "Isabella," he had said. Just her name, like a question he wasn't quite asking. "Mr. DeLuca," she had said. "Thank you for having me." He had nodded once and returned to his wine. Maria sat to his left, watching everything with the contained sharpness of a woman who had spent decades learning to see in a house full of men who thought they were the only ones worth watching. Nathan's younger cousin, Marco, was there 26, restless with the energy of someone who had grown up in a powerful family and hadn't quite figured out his place in it. He had greeted Isabella with the easy warmth of someone trying to be the normal one in a room full of complexity. "Relax," he had whispered when he hugged her hello. "They're not as scary as they look, most of the time." Nathan's other cousin, Carla, sat beside Marco, calm, elegant, with a law degree from Harvard, and the manner of someone who had learned very young that the best information at a DeLuca dinner came from what people didn't say. And then there was Adrian. He sat across from Isabella, and she was painfully aware of that. Not because she was looking at him, she was actively, deliberately not looking at him, but because not looking at someone takes effort, that looking doesn't, and that effort has its own kind of awareness. He ate without speaking for the first half hour. She told herself that was fine. That was normal. Some people didn't lead conversation. Nathan was doing enough for both of them, falling into an easy rhythm with Marco about something related to one of the family's legitimate business operations, a chain of real estate holdings that Nathan managed the financial side of. Dominic watched his sons the way a man watches weather. Not with worry exactly, but with the attention of someone who understands that what he's observing has the capacity to become something significant. It was Maria who turned the conversation toward Isabella. "Nathan tells us you're a nurse," she said. Her tone was pleasant in the way that said the pleasantness was a choice. "I was," Isabella said. "I managed a team at Mass General for 5 years. I left 8 months ago to start my own healthcare consulting company. Small businesses and nonprofits, mostly helping them navigate compliance and patient care protocols." "You left a stable career," Dominic said. He wasn't looking at her. He was cutting his meat. "I built a stable career first," she said. "Then I left it." Silence. "Then smart," Dominic said, still not looking at her. Something relaxed almost imperceptibly around the table. Marco caught her eye and gave her the smallest nod, good answer, and she felt the tension in her shoulders drop 2 degrees. It was at that moment that she heard Adrian's voice for the first time since the hallway. "Your company," he said. "What's the biggest challenge you've run into?" She looked at him. He was watching her with that same measuring attention, his wine glass resting lightly between his fingers. "Getting people to believe that compliance isn't punishment," she said. "Most of the organizations I work with see regulations as obstacles. I spend most of my time convincing people that the structure exists to protect them, not restrict them." "And when they don't believe you," he asked. "I show them what happens to the ones who didn't follow the rules," she said. "It's persuasive." Something moved in his expression. She still didn't know what to call it. "I imagine it is," he said quietly, and he looked back down at his plate. Nathan had been watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't quite parse. He smiled when she caught his eye, warm and easy and familiar, but something underneath it was working, thinking, doing something she couldn't see. She reached for her wine. After dinner, the men moved to Dominic's study business. Nathan had murmured in her ear, apologetic, and Maria led Isabella and Carla to the sitting room. It was there, sitting across from Maria De Luca, with a cup of coffee that was significantly better than anything she made at home, that Isabella discovered that the woman's pleasantness and her judgment were not actually separate things. "How much did Nathan tell you about this family?" Maria asked. She asked it the way you ask a question you already know the answer to. "Enough to know there are things he hasn't told me," Isabella said. Maria looked at her for a moment. Then she set down her cup. "I like that answer," she said. "Most women who come through that door have already decided who they think we are. You're one of the rare ones who admits she doesn't know." "I know who I am," Isabella said. "That's enough to start with." Carla, from the corner of the room where she had been quietly reading something on her phone, looked up at that. There was something in her expression that was close to respect. "Nathan is the easier one," Maria said. Not unkindly, just as fact. "He always has been. He got his mother's warmth." Isabella waited. She could feel the shape of what was coming. "Adrian got everything else," Maria continued. "The intelligence, the discipline, the weight of being Dominic's son in a way that Nathan was always protected from." She paused. "He's not what people think he is." "What do people think he is?" Isabella asked. "Dangerous. Cold. His father's enforcer." Maria picked up her coffee again. "He is all of those things. He's also the only one in this family who has spent 12 years trying to figure out how to become something different." She looked at Isabella steadily. "I tell you this because you were in that hallway tonight and you saw something. I could see it on your face." Isabella didn't answer. "I'm not suggesting anything," Maria said mildly. "I'm simply noting that this family is more complicated than most people realize, and that complicated things tend to get more complicated when the wrong person pays attention." She said it gently, almost kindly, it was still the most precise warning Isabella had ever received. Later, when Nathan walked her out to her car, he was quiet in a way he almost never was. The night was cold. Her breath made small clouds in the dark air, and she could feel the stone of the driveway through the thin soles of her boots. "The hallway," he said finally. "Nathan, no, I need to say this." He stopped walking. He turned toward her, and his face in the dim light outside the mansion was serious in a way she saw less frequently than his easy warmth. "What happened? It was a mistake. I know that. I'm not angry." "Okay," she said carefully. "But I need to know that you understand what you walked into," he said. "This isn't just a family. My brother is, he's not a man you can look at the way you were looking at him over dinner and have it not matter." She felt her chin come up. "I was looking at him like a person." "I know you were," Nathan said. He said it quietly, and there was something in his voice that she couldn't immediately name, not anger, not jealousy exactly. Something older and more complicated than either of those things. "That's exactly what I mean." She stared at him. "What does that mean, Nathan?" He looked away, out into the dark beyond the edge of the property where the iron fencing caught the light. Most people look at Adrian and see what he represents. The power, the history, the reputation. They adjust their behavior around it. He looked back at her. "You didn't. You looked at him like he was just a man sitting across a table." "He is just a man sitting across a table," she said. Nathan shook his head slowly. "Not to the people who know what his name means. Not to anyone who understands what he does." He paused. "Not to him." She thought about Adrian's expression when she had said what she'd said about compliance and persuasion, that thing that moved across his face that she still hadn't found a word for. "I'm dating you," she said firmly. "I came here to meet your family. I made an embarrassing mistake, and I'd like to never think about it again. Can we please—" "Yeah," Nathan said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, and his hand was warm against her cheek, and she leaned into it the way she always did. "Yeah," he said again. "We can." He kissed her properly warm and familiar, and unhurried the way Nathan always kissed her, and she told herself that the thing she was feeling underneath the warmth was only the cold night air. She didn't think she would see Adrian again. That was what she told herself on the drive home. The DeLuca family was Nathan's world, not hers. She was there peripherally, as the woman Nathan was seeing, and Adrian was a peripheral figure in that important to Nathan, significant in the abstract, but not a person whose orbit she was going to enter. She was wrong about that in about 12 hours. She was at her desk the next morning, coffee in hand. Compliance report open on her laptop, the kind of focused work morning she had built her professional life around, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She had a policy about unknown numbers, and it was a firm one. She answered. "Isabella Romano." The voice was not Nathan's. She knew it instantly before her mind had consciously processed the difference. There was that quality again, deeper, quieter, with a still authority that Nathan's warmth didn't carry. "This is Adrian DeLuca." She set down her coffee very deliberately. "How did you get this number?" she asked. "Nathan's contact list isn't difficult to access when you need it to be," he said, as though this were a completely ordinary explanation. "That's reassuring," she said. A pause. "I'm calling because I want to offer you something. A business conversation. Nothing more." "What kind of business conversation?" "I have 3 mid-sized companies under the DeLuca Holdings umbrella that are currently struggling with compliance issues. Legal exposure risks. My attorneys tell me I need a consultant who understands both the regulatory framework and the practical operational side." Another pause. "I heard what you said last night about what you do." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Her compliance specialist brain was already processing the parameters, mid-sized companies' regulatory exposure, the DeLuca business holdings, which were, she happened to know from Nathan, significantly large and diversified. Her common-sense brain was saying something else entirely. "You want to hire me," she said. I want to have a conversation about it, he said. If after the conversation you decide it's not something you want, I'll respect that. I'm not in the habit of pressuring people. She almost said something about that. She held back. Mr. DeLuca, she said carefully. You're Nathan's brother. Yes. We met under unusual circumstances. Yes. You don't find it strange that you're calling me the morning after to offer me a consulting contract? I find it efficient, he said. I have a problem. You described in precise terms exactly what I need. I don't let good information go to waste because the timing is inconvenient. She thought about what Maria had said. He's also the only one in this family who has spent 12 years trying to figure out how to become something different. I'd need to clear it with Nathan first, she said. Of course, Adrian said. And I'd need to know this is strictly professional. What else would it be? He asked. She didn't answer that. I'll call you back, she said. I'll wait, he said. And he hung up. Isabella sat for a long moment staring at her coffee. Then she picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring the way he almost always did. Hey, you. Your brother called me, she said. Silence. A longer silence than she expected. He called you, Nathan repeated. He wants to talk about a consulting contract, compliance work for some of the DeLuca holdings. She kept her voice even, factual. I wanted to tell you before I said anything to him. Another silence. She could hear Nathan breathing deliberate, measured breathing that told her he was choosing his response carefully. What do you want to do? He asked finally. It wasn't the response she had expected. She had expected an opinion, either encouragement because it was business or concern because it was Adrian. Instead, he had asked her what she wanted. I'm asking what you think, she said. I think Adrian doesn't do things without reasons, Nathan said. And I think his reasons are usually more than one layer deep. That's not an answer. No? Nathan agreed. It's not. A pause. Professionally, it would probably be a significant contract. The DeLuca holdings aren't small. If he's got compliance issues he needs handled, that's serious work. Another pause, this one longer. Personally, I think... He stopped. Nathan. I think you should do what you think is right, he said. You're not someone who makes decisions because I tell you to. I wouldn't want you to be. She stared at the wall of her office. I'll be careful, she said. I know you will, he said. She couldn't tell if he believed that, or if he was saying it because it was the thing he was supposed to say, or if those were even different things. I love you, she said. I love you too, Nathan said. She hung up. She looked at the unknown number in her call history for a long moment. Then she called it back. They met at a restaurant downtown. Quiet understated the kind of place where the tables were spaced widely enough for privacy and the staff had been trained to be invisible. Adrian was already there when she arrived, seated in the back with a glass of water and a leather folder on the table in front of him. He stood when she approached, which she hadn't expected. Small things. She noticed small things. It was a professional habit that had served her well. Thank you for coming, he said. I haven't agreed to anything, she said, sitting down. This is just a conversation. That's all I asked for, he said, and sat back down. For the next 40 minutes, they talked business. And she could admit it, at least to herself here at this table, with the white tablecloth and the professional distance firmly in place, she was surprised. Adrian DeLuca was not the man she had constructed from Nathan's careful descriptions and Maria's enigmatic warnings and the general ambient knowledge that surrounded his name in Boston. He was not performatively powerful. He did not use silence as a weapon the way some men did, the deliberate pauses designed to make you feel uncertain of your ground. He was precise, direct. He had read her company's public profile, and he asked about it with the specific attention of someone who had actually processed what they'd read, not just skimmed enough to appear informed. He understood his own regulatory exposure with a clarity that told her he had been thinking about it for a while and had been frustrated by the solutions offered to him. My attorneys are excellent at identifying problems, he said. They're less useful at solving them in ways that work operationally. Every solution they offer me requires shutting down processes that can't be shut down without affecting people. He paused. I'm not interested in compliance that works on paper and fails in practice. That's exactly the wrong approach, she agreed. Which is also what most compliance consultants offer because paper solutions are easier to bill for. He looked at her steadily. What do you offer instead? I come in, I learn how you actually operate, and I build compliance frameworks around the reality of what you do instead of the theory of what you should be doing, she said. It takes longer, it costs more upfront, but it doesn't collapse the moment someone actually tries to implement it. He was quiet for a moment. How long? He asked. Depends on the size of the operation and how long it's been running without proper structure. For 3 mid-sized companies, minimum 3 months for an honest assessment. 6 to 9 for full implementation. He nodded. I want to hire you, he said. Whatever your rate is. She looked at him. Just like that. I make quick decisions, he said. I know, she said. I've heard. The corner of his mouth moved in that almost not quite a smile she had seen the night before. But I need something from you first, she said. What? I need you to understand that I work independently, she said. I don't adjust my findings to be convenient. I don't tell you what you want to hear. If I find something that concerns me, I'm going to tell you, and it's going to be on the table whether it's comfortable or not. I expect that, he said. I also need you to understand that this is work, she said carefully. It's separate from everything else. From Nathan. From last night. From any of it. He met her eyes directly. I understand that, he said. Do you? She asked. He didn't look away. Yes, he said. Quiet. Certain. She studied him for another moment. The stillness of him, the attention he gave to things, a quality of focus that she had noticed at the dinner table the night before, directed at the conversation, at the people, speaking with a completeness that most people never quite achieved. Nathan paid attention. Nathan was warm and present, and wonderful in ways she was deeply grateful for. But Adrian paid attention the way some people breathed, like it was the default state of his existence. Okay, she said. Send me the details on the 3 companies. I'll take a week to review them, and then I'll tell you if I can help you. And if you can't, then I'll tell you who can, she said. He extended his hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and he released her hand with the precise timing of a man who was entirely conscious of every small thing. I'll have the files to you by end of day, he said. Good, she said. She stood up. Isabella, he said. She paused. About last night, he said. His voice was entirely even. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It was a mistake. It's done. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. I'm not embarrassed. She walked out. And she told herself firmly and deliberately, as she stepped through the restaurant door into the cold October air, that the feeling spreading through her chest was purely professional satisfaction. She told herself that. She almost believed it. After all, the files arrived at 4:17 that afternoon, and by the time Isabella finished reviewing the first one, it was nearly midnight. She sat back in her desk chair and rubbed her eyes. The compliance issues were real. Significant in some places. Not criminal, not in the framework of the legitimate businesses, which were genuinely legitimate in ways she had half expected not to find, but structurally vulnerable in ways that could become legal exposure over time. Exactly the kind of slow-burn risk that organizations ignored until they couldn't. She could fix it. She knew she could fix it. She also knew somewhere beneath the professional assessment that taking this contract was walking closer to something she didn't have a clear name for yet. Her phone lit up. Nathan. Still up. She looked at the message for a moment. Working, she typed back. Your brother sent a lot of files. A pause. Then, of course he did. Then, come home soon. I miss you. She stared at that for a long time. Soon she sent. She closed her laptop and looked at the ceiling of her small office. She was good at her work. She was disciplined and precise, and she had built her professional reputation on the unambiguous quality of what she delivered. She was also, she admitted to the ceiling, not entirely sure that professional precision was going to be sufficient armor for everything that was coming, because whatever Adrian DeLuca was complicated, contained carrying the weight of a life that had made him into something sharp and still and unexpectedly thoughtful. He was also the kind of person who created gravity. And Isabella Romano, who had built her entire adult life on standing firmly in her own orbit, had just agreed to step into his. The first week she worked for Adrian DeLuca, Isabella told herself 4 things. 1. This was a professional arrangement, no different from any other client relationship she had built in the 3 years since she left Mass General. 2. The fact that her client happened to be her boyfriend's identical twin brother was an unusual circumstance, not a complicating one. 3. The slight shift in her breathing that happened whenever her phone displayed Adrian's name was a stress response. She had a demanding client with significant regulatory exposure. That was a legitimate reason for physiological tension. 4. She was handling this exactly right. By the end of the second week, she had quietly stopped telling herself any of those things. Not because anything had happened. That was almost the problem. Nothing had happened, and yet everything felt like it was happening in the particular way that things happen just below the surface of what you can see, where pressure builds slowly and invisibly until the moment it doesn't. She was at his offices 3 days a week. The DeLuca Group headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the financial district, clean, modern, starkly different from the Gothic weight of the mansion. She had expected something that reflected the family's more notorious reputation. She found instead an organization that looked at surface level like any other mid to large real estate and investment holding company. The difference was in the details. The staff moved differently. Quietly, with a kind of purposeful efficiency that wasn't the frantic productivity of a startup or the managed busyness of a corporation performing activity. These were people who had learned over time that noise was not the same as work. Adrian ran the operation the same way he did everything else, with a focused precision that she was beginning to understand was less a personality trait than a survival mechanism. A man who had grown up in the DeLuca world under Dominic DeLuca's particular brand of demanding authority had not arrived at stillness by accident. He had been trained by necessity. She had started to figure that out by the end of her first week. She finished figuring it out on a Thursday afternoon in his office when she put a 20-page preliminary assessment on his desk and waited while he read it. He read the whole thing. No skimming. No jumping to the summary page the way most executives did when handed a report they didn't have time for. He started at the beginning and worked through it with a pen in his hand, making small marks in the margins that she recognized as the notations of someone actually processing what they were reading. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked at her. "You found 3 things my legal team missed," he said. "Your legal team was looking for problems within the framework they expected," she said. "I was looking at how the operation actually functions day to day. The gaps are in the places where the reality diverges from the documentation. The Meridian Holdings payroll structure," he said, "is going to be a liability in any audit conducted after March," she said. "The classification system for part-time contractors was designed for a smaller operation. You've tripled the workforce in 18 months, and the classification structure didn't scale with it. It's not intentional, it's just not been updated. But from the outside, it looks like something else." He was quiet for a moment. "How long to fix it?" 6 weeks for the reclassification. Another 3 to document it properly so the paper trail is clear." She paused. "And I'd recommend an internal audit before any external exposure. If I found this, someone else will." He nodded slowly. "Do it." "There's also the vendor payment structure for the Beacon Street properties," she continued. 3 vendors are being paid through a consolidated account that predates the current ownership structure. The original purpose was administrative simplicity, but the way it's configured now creates an appearance of conflict of interest that doesn't exist in practice, but would be very difficult to explain to a regulator who doesn't know the history. He looked at her steadily. My father set up that account structure 15 years ago. She met his eyes. I know, she said. That's why I'm telling you instead of putting it in the written report. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, more like the kind of silence that exists when two people are deciding how much to acknowledge. What do you need from me to change it? He asked. Access to the original account documentation and 30 minutes with your CFO, she said. The fix is straightforward. The conversation about why it needs to be fixed is the harder part. I'll handle the conversation, he said. He said it simply, and she believed him, because she was beginning to understand that when Adrian DeLuca said he would handle something, it was not a social nicety. It was a statement of fact. There's one more thing, she said. He waited. The Harborview Development Project, she said carefully. The licensing timeline in the documentation doesn't match the actual permitting dates on file with the city. She paused. I need to understand how that happened before I can tell you how to address it, because the explanation changes the solution significantly. He looked at her for a long moment. That was before my time, he said. I assumed, she said, which means it was your father's project. Yes. Does your father know I'm working on it? Adrian's expression shifted by a fraction, something that in anyone else she might have called discomfort. He knows you're working on the compliance review. The specific scope of what you're looking at, he's left to me. She absorbed that. He's going to need to be told about Harborview. I know, Adrian said. Is that going to be a problem? He looked at her directly. I'll handle it, he said again. The same tone as before, quiet, certain no room in it for doubt. She studied him. You say that a lot, she said. Because I mean it every time, he said. She picked up her bag and her folders. I'll have the Meridian reclassification plan to you by Monday, she said. Isabella, he said as she turned for the door. She turned back. He was looking at her with that focused attention of his, the kind that felt less like being watched and more like being considered, which was different in ways she didn't entirely have words for. This work you're doing, he said. It matters, not just legally. He paused. I've been trying to make these operations what they should be for a long time. What you're finding, it's not just liability. It's a roadmap. She held his gaze for a moment. Then let's make sure we read it right, she said. And she walked out before whatever was sitting in the space between them could settle into something she'd have to name. Nathan knew something was changing. He didn't say it directly. Nathan rarely said difficult things directly, which was both his greatest kindness and the quality that occasionally made her want to shake him. He felt things deeply and expressed them sideways through the small adjustments in his behavior that she had learned to read over 7 months together. He started calling more often. Not intrusively, not in the way that registers as insecurity or control, but with a new frequency that told her he was checking on something he wasn't ready to ask about directly. He would call on Tuesday evenings when she had been at Adrian's offices during the day, or Thursday nights after her late sessions reviewing documentation. He always had a reason. Dinner planned something funny that had happened, a question about her day, but the timing was not accidental, and they both knew it, and neither of them acknowledged it. She understood why. She also understood in the clear-eyed part of herself that didn't do her any favors that the reason she wasn't asking Nathan to say what he was really thinking was because she wasn't sure she was ready to have that conversation either. The night that changed things between them was a Thursday in early November. She had been at the DeLuca offices until 7, working through a complex vendor audit with Adrian's CFO, a sharp-edged woman named Diane, who had been with the company for 11 years and had the careful manner of someone who had learned long ago that her survival depended on managing information precisely. Diane was not obstructive, but she was guarded, and Isabella had spent most of the session doing the particular work of making a cautious person feel safe enough to be honest. By the time she got to Nathan's apartment, they had developed a loose routine of Thursday dinners alternating between his place and hers. She was tired in the bone-deep way that came not from physical effort, but from sustained attention. Nathan had cooked. He did that small, warm gestures that he performed without commentary and without expectation, the way genuinely considerate people do things. The table was set. There was wine. He had made the chicken piccata she had mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago, because Nathan remembered things she said even when she had already forgotten she'd said them. She sat down and looked at the table, and felt a rush of feeling for him that was real and warm, and not complicated at all. "Long day?" he asked, sitting across from her. "Long week," she said. "But productive." He poured her wine. "How's it going?" "The compliance work." "Good," she said. "It's complicated, but good. There are real problems to solve, and Adrian—" She stopped for exactly 1 beat. The DeLuca holdings have enough complexity that it's genuinely interesting work. She had almost not caught herself. The correction had been fast enough that a less attentive person wouldn't have noticed. Nathan noticed. He didn't say anything. He served the chicken. He asked her about something else, a problem one of her other clients was having, a city council regulatory change she had mentioned the week before, and the conversation moved on, and they ate together the way they always did, with the comfortable familiarity of two people who fit together well. But over dessert, he set his fork down and looked at her. "You said his name," he said, quietly, without accusation. She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "I know." "You corrected yourself," he said. "I know that too." He looked at her steadily. Nathan's eyes, when he was serious, had a quality she had never quite been able to describe: deep and warm and entirely open in a way that most people weren't capable of, a willingness to simply see what was there without flinching. "Is something happening?" he asked. "No," she said. And she meant it. Because nothing had happened. Not a single moment that she could point to and say, "This is the thing." Not a touch, not a word, not an action that crossed any line. "Nothing is happening." "But something is there," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. She owed him honesty. She had always owed him honesty, and whatever else she was uncertain of, she was not willing to be someone who chose comfort over truth. "I don't know what's there," she said carefully. "I know that your brother is not what I expected him to be. I know that working with him is different from what I anticipated. I know that I'm being careful." She met his eyes. "And I know that I love you, and I'm not doing anything I'm ashamed of." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know you're not," he said. His voice was even, but she could see the effort that evenness cost him, the particular tight quality around his jaw that told her he was holding something back. "That's not what concerns me." "Then what does?" she asked. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "Adrian has a way of making people feel understood," he said. "He's always been like that. He pays attention in a way that most people don't, and when he focuses on you, it feels like—" He paused, choosing carefully. "It feels like the most important thing in the room." She said nothing. "I grew up with him," Nathan said. "I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that attention, and I know how powerful it is for someone who's never experienced it before." "Nathan, I'm not blaming you," he said. "I'm not blaming him. I'm telling you what I see." He looked at her steadily. "Because I'd rather say it out loud than watch it happen quietly." She reached across the table and took his hand. He let her, and his fingers closed around hers. "I'm here," she said. "Right now, I'm sitting at your table eating food you cooked for me, and I am here." He squeezed her hand once. "I know," he said. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He agreed. They finished dinner. They talked about other things. He made her laugh twice genuinely, the way Nathan always could, and when she left that night, she kissed him at the door and held on a few seconds longer than usual. She didn't look back when she walked to her car. She didn't trust herself to. She was 2 blocks from Nathan's building when her phone rang. Unknown number, but she knew by now what that meant. She answered. "It's late," she said. A statement, not a greeting. "I know," Adrian said. I wouldn't call if it wasn't necessary." She stopped walking. "What happened?" "Victor Salvatore's people made contact with 2 of our vendors today," he said. His voice was completely controlled, but underneath the control, she had learned to hear the things he was managing. They were asking questions about our permitting process on the Harborview project. She felt everything in her sharpen. "He knows about the licensing discrepancy," she said. "Or he suspects," Adrian said. "Either way, he's looking." Victor Salvatore. She knew the name. Nathan had mentioned it once briefly, in the context of old rivalries and older grudges. A man from the generation before Adrian's who operated on the principles of intimidation and preemptive destruction, and who had never forgiven the DeLuca family for something she had never been told the specifics of. "If he can demonstrate the licensing irregularity was intentional," she began, "he can create enough noise to trigger a regulatory investigation," Adrian said. "Yes, I know." "How much time do we have?" "I don't know," he said. "That's the problem." She stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and ran through the variables at the speed she had built over years of exactly this kind of pressured analysis. "The vendor contacts, did they say anything?" "No, they called me instead of engaging." "That buys us something, but I don't know how much." "I can accelerate the Harborview documentation review," she said, "if we can establish a clear paper trail for how the discrepancy happened before anyone starts looking at it as intentional. That changes the regulatory risk profile significantly." "How fast?" "Give me the weekend," she said. "And I need your father to sit down with me on Monday. Not a summary, I need him in the room with the documents." A pause. The longest pause she had ever heard from him. "He won't like that," Adrian said. "I don't need him to like it," she said. "I need him to cooperate with it." Another pause. "All right," he said. "All right." "I said I'd handle it," he said. "I meant it." She almost smiled. "I'm aware." "Isabella." He paused. "Thank you." She looked up at the sky over the city, dark, scattered with the kind of urban stars that competed with light pollution and mostly lost. "This is my job," she said. "Yes," he said, "but you're doing it exceptionally well." She was quiet for a moment. Something about the simplicity of it. No performance, no flattery. Just the direct statement of what he observed landed with a precision that more elaborate compliments never managed. "I'll have an updated timeline to you by Sunday morning," she said. "Get some sleep first," he said. "I'll sleep when the filing's done," she said. She could hear very faintly what might have been the beginning of a low laugh. She had never heard him laugh. She was fairly certain this was as close as she'd gotten. "Sunday morning," he said, and hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer. Then she went home, made herself a pot of coffee, and opened her laptop. She barely slept that weekend. By Sunday, at 6 a.m, she had reconstructed from the available documentation a complete timeline of the Harborview licensing process, every permit application, every approval, every communication between the DeLuca organization and the city permitting office going back 14 years to when Dominic DeLuca had initiated the project. What she found was not what she had expected. The licensing discrepancy, the mismatch between the documented timeline and the actual permitting dates, was not the result of intentional manipulation. It was the result of something significantly more mundane, and in some ways, more troubling incompetence. Specifically, the incompetence of the attorney who had managed the original permitting process, a man named Gerald Foss, who had been with the DeLuca organization for 20 years, and who had, she was now virtually certain, simply filed documents incorrectly on 3 separate occasions, and then covered the errors with documentation that was technically present, but chronologically impossible. Gerald Foss had died 4 years ago, which meant the errors had never been caught, never been corrected, and were now sitting in the file as a liability that looked to any external observer like exactly the kind of deliberate irregularity that Victor Salvatore would be looking for. She called Adrian at 7:15 on Sunday morning. He answered on the first ring. "You found something," he said. "Not a question. Your permitting attorney made 3 filing errors between 2011 and 2014 and papered over them," she said. Gerald Foss. Silence. He's been dead 4 years, Adrian said. I know, which is why no one caught it. The errors are buried under documentation that passes a surface audit. But if someone pulls the actual city records and cross-references against the internal files, the dates don't align. Victor's people could do that, Adrian said. If they know to look for it, she said. The question is whether they know enough to look in that specific place. She paused. How did they know to approach the vendors about Harborview specifically? A silence that was different from his other silences. More charged. That, he said slowly, is a very good question. It's not a question I can answer from the documents, she said. But it's one that should probably be answered before Monday. Yes, he said. And she could hear him thinking. Not the distracted noise of thinking, but the very quiet that was his particular form of intense focus. Can you fix the filing problem? I can create a documented explanation that accounts for the discrepancy and demonstrates it was administrative error, she said. It's not a fix in the sense of making the problem not exist. It's a fix in the sense of making the problem explainable instead of incriminating. How long? I need Monday's meeting with your father. If he can confirm what he remembers about the original filing process, I can finalize the documentation by Wednesday. He'll be there, Adrian said. And Adrian, she said. Yes. The question about how Victor's people knew where to look, she said. That's not a compliance question. That's something else. A beat. I know, he said. His voice had gone to a particular kind of quiet that she was learning to pay attention to. I'm already looking into it. Is it dangerous? Most things in this business are dangerous, he said. This one is manageable. She wasn't entirely reassured. She also wasn't in a position to push further. Monday, she said. Monday, he confirmed. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment. Her laptop open. 14 years of DeLuca documentation spread across her desk in organized stacks, a cold cup of coffee at her elbow. She thought about what Nathan had said. He has a way of making people feel understood. She thought about the difference between being understood and being seen. She had always thought they were the same thing. She was beginning to think they might not be. Her phone lit up. Nathan. Morning. Want to get brunch? She looked at the message, looked at the stacks of paper, looked at the message again. She typed back, yes. Give me an hour. She closed the laptop. Whatever was happening in the space between her professional life and everything else, Nathan was the person she had chosen. Nathan was the person who cooked dinner and remembered what she'd said in passing and held her hand during the things that mattered. She was not going to let work, even complicated, important, urgent work, make her forget the difference between a person who saw her and the life she had actually built. She put on her coat and went to meet him. Brunch was easy and warm in the way that Nathan always managed to make things a place in Back Bay. They had been to a dozen times, the kind of comfortable familiarity that settled around them like something well-worn and reliable. He didn't ask about work. She was grateful for that. Instead, he talked about a trip he had been thinking about somewhere warm for January, which was his least favorite month and always had been. He described it with the kind of particular enthusiasm he brought to things he actually cared about, detailing the specific quality of beach he wanted, the lack of activities he intended to plan, the specific cocktail he intended to drink at an unreasonably early hour on the first morning. She laughed. She meant it. Come with me, he said. She looked at him across the table. January's a long way off, she said. It's 8 weeks, he said. That's not very long. She smiled. Okay, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb traced a small pattern across her knuckles, a gesture so unconscious and habitual she was sure he didn't realize he was doing it. I love you, he said, the way he always said it, simply without orchestration. I love you, she said back. She meant that too, and she was not going to examine too closely why meaning it and feeling uncomplicated about it had started to feel like different things. The meeting with Dominic DeLuca on Monday morning was the most intense professional experience of Isabella's career, and she had spent 5 years managing a trauma unit at one of the busiest hospitals in New England. Dominic came to it the way he came to everything on his own terms, in his own time, with the settled authority of a man who had never in his adult life been in a room where he was not the most significant presence. He sat across from her at the conference table, Adrian beside him, in a way that was both present and deliberately positioned close enough to intervene if necessary, contained enough to let the meeting run. Dominic looked at her assessment documents for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "You found Gerald's mistakes," he said, not a question. "I found the filing discrepancies," she said carefully. "The explanation is clear when you know where to look." "Did you know when you hired him that he'd made errors on the Harborview filings?" she asked. Dominic looked at her with that dark, fathomless attention. "No," he said. "I trusted him. He was with this family 20 years. He paused. "People you trust are capable of failures you don't see." "That's true," she said. "And it's also the explanation I'm going to build the documentation around." She met his gaze directly. "Mr. DeLuca, I need you to understand that what I'm doing here is not covering anything up. I'm establishing an accurate account of what happened. The difference matters legally." "I understand the difference," he said, with the slight edge of a man not accustomed to being explained to. "Good," she said without apology. Something shifted in Dominic's expression, the faintest recalibration of what he was looking at. She had been watching for it. Nathan had warned her it would happen that moment when Dominic decided who a person was. She hoped she had just landed on the right side of it. "She's thorough," Dominic said. He was talking to Adrian, not to her. "Yes," Adrian said simply. Dominic looked at her again. "How does this get resolved?" "The documentation goes through my office first, then your attorneys, then into the city record, through an amended filing that's been cross-referenced and verified," she said. "It takes approximately 3 weeks if everyone cooperates." "Everyone will cooperate," Dominic said. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "Victor Salvatore's people knew to look at Harborview specifically," she said. "That information came from somewhere inside your organization." Silence. The kind of silence that had its own weight. Dominic looked at his son. Adrian's face was entirely still. "I've identified the likely source," he said. "It's being handled." "Who?" Dominic said. One word. Very quiet. "Not in this meeting," Adrian said. His father looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them, complex, old, layered with things she did not have context for. Then Dominic nodded once. "Fine," he said. He stood. The meeting apparently was over on his timeline rather than anyone else's. At the door he stopped without turning around. "Miss Romano," he said. "Yes." He turned just enough to look at her over his shoulder. "You're not what I expected." She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. "I never am," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Slight, almost imperceptible. He walked out. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and looked at Adrian. He was watching her with an expression she had started to catalog, the one that wasn't quite neutral, that had something working in it she still couldn't fully name. "Well done," he said quietly. "He's formidable," she said. "Most people find him terrifying." Adrian said. "I find terrifying people easier to work with than vague ones," she said. "At least you know exactly what you're dealing with." He looked at her steadily. "Do you feel that way about me?" The question landed with a precision that took her a fraction of a second to absorb. She met his eyes. "You're not terrifying," she said carefully. "You're something else." He waited for her to finish. She picked up her documents and put them in her bag. "I'll have the amended timeline to your attorneys by Friday," she said. She walked to the door. "Isabella," he said. She paused with her hand on the doorframe. What you did in that room, he said. With my father. The way you held your ground without making him feel confronted. He paused. I've watched lawyers, advisors, and partners fail to do that for 30 years. She looked at him over her shoulder. I didn't do it to impress anyone, she said. I did it because it was the right approach. I know, he said. That's exactly why I'm saying it. She left. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood waiting, and told herself the warmth moving through her chest was professional pride. She was getting less convincing at that. The source of the information leak was confirmed by Wednesday. Adrian called her at noon, and his voice had that particular quality she had learned to associate with things he was carrying at significant personal cost. Marco, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment. Nathan's cousin, she said. He's been feeding information to Salvatore's people for 3 months, Adrian said. Financial pressure, personal debts, he'd been hiding from the family. Salvatore found them and used them. He paused. He's 26 years old. She heard what was underneath the facts he was reciting. Not just the operational damage, the personal weight of it. A cousin. A family member. Someone who had grown up in the same rooms at the same table with the same people. Has Nathan been told? She asked. Not yet, he said. I wanted to. He stopped. You wanted to figure out how to tell him first, she said. A pause. Yes. She thought about Marco at the dinner, his easy warmth that whispered, relax, they're not as scary as they look. She thought about the people who turned desperate before they turned dishonest, and how the path between the two was shorter than anyone wanted to believe. How is he being handled? She asked carefully. His debts are being paid, Adrian said. He's being moved out of any access to operational information. Beyond that, another pause. I haven't decided. You're not going to punish him the old way, she said. She said it without inflection. Neither question nor accusation, simply the statement of something she had come to understand about the man she was speaking to. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I'm not. Does your father know? He will tonight, he said. That conversation is going to be... He stopped again. She heard him exhale. Just once, barely audible, the first moment of unguarded humanity she had heard from him across all the weeks of working together. Complicated, she finished. That's a gentle word for it, he said. She sat at her desk and looked at nothing in particular. Adrian. Yes. You're doing the right thing, she said. Even if it doesn't feel that way when you're in the middle of it. Silence. How do you know? He asked. And the question was, she heard it with perfect clarity, genuine, not rhetorical, not performative. The actual question of a man who was genuinely uncertain. Because the easy thing would have been to handle it quietly and never tell anyone how it happened, she said. You're not doing the easy thing. Another silence. Thank you, he said, very quiet. It's the truth, she said. They stayed on the line for a few more seconds without speaking. Just the particular quality of shared silence between two people who had stopped needing to fill it. Go talk to your father, she said finally. Yes, he said. He hung up. She sat for a long time after that, the phone in her hand, the quiet of her office around her. She thought about the man on the other end of that call, measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of a family that was both his inheritance and his burden, trying to build something different out of the materials he had been given, without a blueprint for how to do it. She thought about Nathan, who was warm and easy and good, and who looked at her in a way that made her feel safe. She thought about the difference between safe and alive. She wasn't ready to look at that difference directly yet, but she was starting to understand that it was there. Nathan found out about Marco on a Wednesday evening, and the way he found out was not the careful, considered conversation Adrian had been preparing. He found out because he walked into his father's study without knocking. Isabella learned this from Nathan himself an hour later, when he called her from his car with the particular compressed quality in his voice that told her he was driving too fast and holding himself together by force of will alone. He knew, Nathan said. Adrian knew for 3 days and didn't tell me. She was very careful with her next words. He was figuring out how to handle it responsibly before... Marco sat at my table last week, Nathan said. I had him over for dinner. I asked him how he was doing and he looked me in the eye and... He stopped. She could hear him breathing. 3 days, Isabella. Nathan, did you know? The question hit her squarely. She didn't hesitate. I found out Wednesday, earlier today, same as you. A silence. Then, but you knew before me. By hours, she said. He told me because it affected the compliance work. The leak came through the Harbor View files. Right, Nathan said. Because you're working with him. She didn't answer that. There was nothing in that sentence that was a question. I'm not angry at you, Nathan said, and the careful way he said it told her that the careful part was deliberate, that there was something underneath it he was managing. I'm angry at the situation. I know, she said. Marco is 26 years old, Nathan said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and that crack brief, immediately controlled, told her more about how much he loved his cousin than anything else he could have said. He was scared, and he made a terrible decision, and instead of coming to me or Adrian or anyone, he went... He stopped again. He was ashamed, Isabella said softly. People do desperate things when they're ashamed. Silence. Yeah, Nathan said finally. Yeah, I know. Are you going to your father's? I'm already there, he said. I'm sitting in the driveway. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes because I don't know what I'm going to say when I walk through that door. She understood that feeling. She had felt a version of it herself 3 weeks ago, standing in front of a building she was about to complicate her life by entering. Say what's true, she said. That's always the right place to start. He was quiet for a moment. Will you be here when I'm done? I'll be here, she said. He hung up. She sat in her apartment and looked at her phone and thought about what she had just said. I'll be here. She meant it as comfort. She also meant it as fact. She was at the moment exactly where she was in her apartment available, the person Nathan called when something broke. She was also the person who had spent the last 3 weeks sitting in offices with his brother, learning to read the quality of his silences, finding herself explaining things to him, and being understood before she finished the sentence. She was here. That was true. She was also somewhere else, and that was becoming impossible to ignore. Adrian called 40 minutes later. She answered before the second ring. Nathan found out, she said. I know, he said. He came through my father's study door like... A pause. It was bad. How bad? They said things that have been waiting a long time to be said, Adrian said. His voice was controlled, but she heard the edge underneath it, not anger, something older and more complicated. Some of it was about Marco. Some of it was about other things. About you, she said. A silence. About the way I handle things, he said carefully. She understood what that meant. She also understood what it cost him to phrase it the way he had, protective of the specifics, honest about the shape of it. Is Nathan okay? She asked. He will be, Adrian said. Then after a moment, he loves deeply. It's his best quality, and the thing that makes everything harder for him. She heard the way he said it, not with envy exactly, but with something that recognized a quality he was describing from the outside, from a distance that had its own particular loneliness. And you? She asked. A pause. What about me? Are you okay? Silence. Longer than his usual silence. The kind that told her the question had landed somewhere he hadn't been expecting. I'm managing, he said finally. That's not the same thing, she said. Another pause. And then quietly, no, it's not. She held the phone and said nothing, and the silence between them was the same kind it had been on Monday, the kind neither of them needed to fill. Go check on your brother, she said eventually. I'm going to, he said. He paused one more moment. Isabella. Yes. Thank you, he said, for being honest with him about when you found out. She frowned slightly. Of course I was honest. I know, he said. That's why I'm thanking you. A beat. Most people adjust the truth when they think it will make things easier. It never does, she said. No, he said. It never does. He hung up. She set her phone down and stared at the wall. She thought about what Nathan had said weeks ago. He has a way of making people feel understood. She had thought she understood what he meant. She was beginning to understand it at a depth she hadn't anticipated, and the understanding was not entirely comfortable. Nathan came to her apartment at 11 that night, and she knew the moment she opened the door that the conversation they were about to have was not the one she had been expecting. He came in. He sat on her couch. He looked like a man who had been through something that had rearranged things he hadn't known needed to be rearranged, and was sitting in the unfamiliar silence of the new arrangement. She made tea. She put it in front of him. She sat in the chair across from him and waited. My father wants Adrian to handle Salvatore the old way, Nathan said. She said nothing. He said Adrian's been too soft, that the compliance work, the restructuring, trying to clean up the legitimate side, he called it weakness. He said Salvatore is going to read it as an opportunity and attack harder. He looked at his hands. They were at it for 2 hours. I was there for most of it. What did Adrian say? She asked. He said he wouldn't do it that way, Nathan said. He was completely calm about it. You know how he gets that particular kind of quiet that's actually the opposite of quiet. He paused. My father told him that if he wasn't willing to protect this family the way it needed to be protected, then maybe Nathan should be running things instead of him. The room was very still. Nathan, she said carefully. He didn't mean it, Nathan said quickly. It was said in anger. My father says things in anger that he doesn't. He stopped. But Adrian heard it, and I heard it, and we're all going to be in a room together pretending it wasn't said. That's a significant thing to say, she said. Yeah, Nathan agreed. He finally picked up the tea, held it without drinking. The thing is... He stopped. Say it, she said. He looked at her. The thing is that Adrian deserves to run things. He always has. He's been carrying this family on his back since he was 22 years old, and my father has never once told him that he trusts him. He shook his head. Everything he does, the legitimate restructuring, the compliance work, hiring you, it's all part of the same thing. He's been trying to build something he can actually be proud of, something that doesn't require him to be what everyone thinks he is. A beat. And my father told him tonight that the thing everyone thinks he is what this family needs. She absorbed that. What do you need right now? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, something working through around something else. I need to know where we are, he said. His voice was very quiet. You and me. She felt the shift, the way the room realigned around those words. What do you mean? She asked. She wasn't avoiding. She was giving him the space to say what he actually meant. I mean that something has changed, he said, in the last few weeks. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I feel it, and I think you feel it too. And I'd rather know than not know. She looked at him. She loved him. She was completely clear about that, the warmth she felt for him, the gratitude, the deep affection built across 7 months of being known and cared for by someone who did both of those things genuinely. She also loved him too much to lie to him about what else was true. I don't know how to explain it, she said. Nothing has happened. I need you to understand that there's been nothing between me and Adrian that's crossed any line. I know that, Nathan said. That's not what I'm asking. She looked at her hands. I feel things when I'm around him, she said. Things I don't fully understand. She stopped. He sees you, Nathan said, quietly, without heat. Just the truth of it said plainly by a man who loved her enough to say it. She looked up at him. I see you too, he said. But I know the difference between the way I see you and the way he does. I've known the difference between the way Adrian pays attention and the way I do my whole life." He paused. "He's always been more focused, more intense, more everything. It's exhausting sometimes growing up next to someone like that." "Nathan," she said. Her voice broke slightly on his name. "Don't apologize," he said. "I'm not saying this so you'll apologize. I'm saying it because I love you, and I'd rather have the honest version of this than the version where we're both pretending it isn't happening." She stared at him. This man, this genuinely good man with his warmth and his patience and his deliberate kindness, was sitting across from her and offering her the truth in both hands. And she did not know what to do with how much that hurt. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "I mean that." "I know you do," he said. "I don't know what I feel about Adrian. You're drawn to him," Nathan said simply. "And he's drawn to you. And the question is, what you do with that." She couldn't speak for a moment. "I'm not giving you an ultimatum," he said. "That's not who I am. But I need you to be honest with me, even when it's uncomfortable. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "I can always do that." He nodded slowly. He stood up. He picked up his coat. "Take some time," he said. "Think about what you want. Not what's right or wrong or complicated, just what you actually want." He looked at her. "I love you enough to wait for the honest answer." He kissed her forehead, the way you kiss someone you love when love isn't quite enough to solve anything. And he left. She sat in the silence he left behind for a very long time. She didn't contact Adrian for 3 days. She needed the space to see clearly, and she knew with the professional self-knowledge of someone who had spent years learning to identify when her own judgment was compromised that she couldn't see clearly with his voice in her ear. She worked. She finalized the Harbor View filing documentation and sent it to the DeLuca attorneys with a detailed cover letter. She put in a full day at one of her other clients, a nonprofit healthcare organization in Cambridge, that needed exactly the kind of practical, clear-eyed guidance she had built her reputation on. She called her mother, which she hadn't done enough of lately. Her mother was a woman who had survived her husband leaving when Isabella was 9, raised 2 daughters on a nurse's salary, and developed the particular wisdom that comes from having navigated genuine difficulty without losing either your sense of humor or your sense of self. She was 71 years old, and she did not miss things. "You sound like someone who's standing at a fork in the road," her mother said 15 minutes into the call. "I'm fine," Isabella said. "Honey, I pushed you out of my body 38 years ago. Don't tell me you're fine when you're not." Isabella laughed despite herself. "It's complicated." "It's always complicated," her mother said. "Simple things don't tie your voice up like that. Who is he?" Isabella closed her eyes. "Which one?" A pause. Then her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, something wise and rueful and entirely unsurprised. "Oh, Bambina." "Don't," Isabella said. "I'm not saying anything," her mother said. "What's the difference between them?" Isabella thought about it, really thought the way she had been avoiding for weeks. "Nathan makes me feel safe," she said. "He's warm, and he's good, and he loves me in a way I can actually hold on to." And the other one, she was quiet for a moment. "He makes me feel like I'm exactly the right size," she said. "Like there's nothing about me that's too much or not enough. He just looks at me, and I feel like whatever I am is exactly what was supposed to be there." Her mother was quiet. "That's a different thing," her mother said finally. "I know," Isabella said. "Safe isn't nothing," her mother said. "Safe is actually quite a lot. People undervalue safe because they can't feel it the way they can feel the other thing." "I know," Isabella said again. "But you can't build a life on safe if your heart is always going somewhere else," her mother said. "And you can't build a life on electricity if there's nothing underneath it to hold the structure." She paused. "The question is, which one has both?" Isabella sat with that for a long time after she hung up. On the 3rd day, Adrian came to her. Not a call, not a text. He appeared at the door of her office building at 9 in the morning, and her assistant buzzed up with the particular tone that meant she was uncertain whether to send someone through. "Send him up," Isabella said. He walked into her office, and he looked for the first time since she had known him like a man who had been tested and was showing the marks of it. He was impeccably dressed as always. But there was something in his face that was different from the contained, precise person she had come to know. Something that was working closer to the surface. "I need to tell you something," he said. He didn't sit down. He stood in the center of her office, and she stood behind her desk, and they looked at each other across the space. "All right," she said. "Victor Salvatore made contact yesterday," he said. "Not through intermediaries, directly. He wants a meeting." She straightened. "That's either a negotiation or a trap." "It's both," he said. "He wants to propose a merger of certain operations, on terms that would essentially mean absorbing the DeLuca organization into his structure." He paused. "In exchange, the Harborview documentation issue goes away. He claims to have enough to trigger a regulatory investigation, and he's offering to suppress it." She stared at him. "He's using the filing discrepancy as leverage." "Yes, but the documentation has already been corrected," she said. "The amended filing is with your attorneys." "He doesn't know that," Adrian said. "He thinks he still has the leverage." She processed this quickly. "So he's negotiating from a position of strength he doesn't actually have." "Correct. Which means if you go into this meeting knowing what he doesn't know, the entire dynamic shifts," she said. "Yes," he said, "but he's bringing people. And the meeting location is his choice. And my father wants me to walk in there and respond to his offer the way my father would respond, with a demonstration of what happens to people who come after this family." She heard what he was saying. She heard everything underneath it. "And you don't want to do it that way. If I do it that way," he said, "everything I've spent 12 years building becomes exactly what he's been calling it. Weakness about to be dismantled." He paused. "If I don't, if I go in there and make him understand through intelligence instead of intimidation that his leverage is gone and his proposal is built on a foundation that no longer exists, then I win the meeting without becoming my father." She looked at him. "But your father is pressuring you to do it his way. My father told me last night that if I walk into that meeting without a willingness to respond decisively, I am not fit to lead this family," he said. His voice was completely even. His face was completely still. And she knew him well enough now to understand that the evenness and the stillness were the most honest indicators of how much that had cost him. "Adrian," she said. "I'm not here for reassurance," he said. "I've made my decision. I'm going to handle Salvatore my way." He met her eyes directly. "I'm here because the documentation is part of this. Because if I go into that meeting, I need to understand exactly what Harborview looks like from his perspective versus what the corrected record actually shows. I need to know exactly where his leverage ends." She moved around the desk. She pulled a file, the complete Harborview documentation, which she kept at her office, as well as sending copies to his attorneys. She opened it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. For the next 90 minutes they worked. She walked him through every element of the corrected documentation, not just the what, but the why, the legal logic, the specific regulatory framework that made the amended filing unassailable. She showed him line by line where Salvatore's presumed leverage ended and where the DeLuca position was now protected. He absorbed it, the way he absorbed everything completely, without pretending to understand things he needed. Clarified, asking precise questions that told her exactly how his mind was organizing the information. She had worked with a lot of people. She had sat across from executives and administrators and attorneys and city officials and hospital board members in the focused, pressured space of professional problem solving. She had never worked with anyone who made her better at it by being in the room. "The amended filing was submitted 3 days ago," she said, setting the last document down. "By the time Salvatore's people check the actual city record, assuming they do, which they will, if the meeting goes long enough for them to be suspicious, they'll find nothing to substantiate the leverage." "Good," he said. He looked at the documents for a moment, then at her. "You did that in 4 days. 3.5, she said. That almost not quite a smile. 3.5, he agreed. She looked at him across the table, the files between them, the particular quality of the morning light in her office, the city sound below them, the silence in the room that was comfortable in a way she had stopped trying to explain. "Nathan told me he talked to you," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out because it was the truth sitting at the surface, and she was not someone who buried surface truths. Adrian's expression shifted. A very small change, the slight tightening at the corners of his eyes, that she now recognized as the way he registered things that were difficult. "Yes," he said. "He's a good man," she said. "The best man I know," Adrian said. Immediately, without qualification. "He always has been." She looked at him. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm not going to—" She stopped, started again. "I haven't made any decisions. I need you to know that." He met her eyes. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "Are you not asking because you don't want to?" she asked. "Or because you think you shouldn't?" The question landed with a clarity that she saw him absorb. He was quiet for a long moment, not the silence of evasion, but the silence of a man who was being honest with himself before he spoke. "Both," he said finally. "And neither. I want—" He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. "I want things I don't have the right to want right now. And I want you to have what you actually need, which may not be the same thing." He paused. "And I want Nathan to not be hurt by something I did." "You didn't do anything," she said. "I called you," he said, "the morning after the dinner. I could have contacted Nathan directly about the consulting work. I didn't." He looked at her steadily. "I told myself it was efficiency. It wasn't only that." The honesty of it was almost startling. She had braced for deflection and instead got the direct acknowledgement of something he had done and understood. "Adrian," she said. "Don't," he said quietly. "Not now. Not with all of this in front of us." He gestured almost imperceptibly at the files, the meeting, the Salvatore situation, everything bearing down simultaneously. "Let's finish what we started. Then, whatever needs to happen, happens." She looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded. "The meeting with Salvatore," she said. "When?" "Friday," he said. "Who knows about the corrected filing?" "My attorneys, you, Diane." He paused. "Not Salvatore. If he brings documentation he believes is damaging," she said, "the moment he presents it, you can inform him that the amended filing is already on record, that his leverage doesn't exist." She paused. "He's going to be angry." "Yes," Adrian said. "Dangerously angry?" she asked. She asked it without alarm, the same direct way she asked everything. He looked at her. "He's not going to do anything in a meeting room that creates witnesses," he said. "After the meeting is different." Her jaw tightened slightly. "So there's a risk." "There's always a risk," he said. "The question is whether the alternative, giving him what he's asking for, is a bigger one." She thought about everything she had come to understand about the DeLuca organization over the past weeks, about what Adrian was building, about the slow, deliberate work of making something legitimate out of something that had been built on different principles. "It is," she said. "If you give him this, he'll always know it works. He'll be back." "I know," he said. She stood up and went to her window and looked at the city below. Boston on a clear November morning, the harbor in the distance, the familiar skyline she had grown up under. "I want to be there," she said. She heard him stand up behind her. "Absolutely not," he said. His voice had gone to a quality she hadn't heard from him before, sharp, immediate, no room in it for negotiation. She turned around. "I'm the architect of the documentation that removes his leverage. If there's a question about the specifics of the filing, I'm the one who can answer it with authority. Not your attorneys. They reviewed it. They didn't build it." "It's not safe," he said. "It's a meeting room," she said. "You said so yourself." "I said he wouldn't do anything that creates witnesses during the meeting," he said. That's different from it being safe. Adrian. No, he said. It was the clearest, most unambiguous no she had heard from him. He was looking at her with an intensity that was different from his usual focused attention. This was something that operated in a different register entirely. Something urgent and direct, and entirely stripped of the controlled precision he normally operated through. "Why does it matter?" she asked. Quiet, direct. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know why," he said. The room was very still. She looked at him, this man who had spent 34 years carrying things alone, who paid attention to everything, and showed it to almost no one who was in the middle of the most significant fight of his professional life, and had come to her office not for reassurance, but for the work, because work was the language he knew how to speak. "I'll stay off-site," she said. "I'll be reachable by phone. If a documentation question comes up that your attorneys can't answer in the room, you call me, and I'll walk you through it." He held her gaze for a moment. "That's the compromise," she said. "Take it." A beat. "All right," he said. "And Adrian," she said, "go into that room and be exactly who you've been trying to become. Not your father, not the man Salvatore thinks he's negotiating with. Just the person who spent 12 years figuring out how to do this right." He looked at her, that thing in his face that she still didn't have a complete word for, somewhere between recognition and something warmer. "You sound like you believe that's possible," he said. "I've watched you work for 5 weeks," she said. "Yes, I believe it's possible." He held her eyes for one more moment, then he picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I'll call you when it's done," he said. "I'll be waiting," she said. He moved toward the door. He stopped with one hand on the frame, his back half turned to her in a posture that was, and she registered this with a clarity that moved through her like cold water, almost exactly the posture of the first moment she had ever seen him. In the hallway of the mansion, before she had kissed him by mistake, before any of this had started. "Isabella," he said. "Yes." He turned just enough to look at her. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I want you to know that the time working with you has been—" He paused, finding the exact word with the precision he brought to everything. "Significant, in ways that have nothing to do with the compliance work." She held his gaze. "I know," she said softly. He nodded once, and walked out. She stood in her office and listened to the sound of the elevator arriving and the doors closing, and the building settling back into its ordinary sounds. Then she sat down at her desk and pressed both hands flat against the surface and let herself feel for exactly 60 seconds everything she had been managing for 5 weeks. All of it. The warmth she felt for Nathan, real deep, not diminished. The thing she felt when Adrian was in the room, different, unnerving in its precision. The way it bypassed every careful structure she had built and found the parts of her she had always been the most protective of. The particular loneliness of loving someone and still feeling like some essential piece of you is somewhere else. 60 seconds. She counted them. Then she picked up her phone and called her paralegal to review the Harborview documentation one final time. Because work was also something she knew how to speak, and right now, work was what she had. Friday came, the way important days always did, with the indifference of ordinary time, the city going about its morning, while Isabella sat in her office with her phone charged and her files open, and every part of her attention aimed at a meeting room across town, where Adrian DeLuca was about to face Victor Salvatore, without a weapon except the truth. Her phone rang at 10:14. She picked up before the first ring finished. "It started," Adrian said. He was speaking quietly, which told her other people were nearby. He brought 4 people, his attorney and 3 others. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady, professional. "Are you all right?" "Yes," he said. He opened with the Harborview leverage, exactly as expected. "And I told him the filing had been amended and is already on public record." A pause. "He didn't believe me." She straightened. "Is his attorney with him?" "Yes." "Have his attorney pull the city record right now," she said. "On his phone right there in the room. Don't let them recess, keep them in the room, and have him pull it live." A brief silence. She heard faintly voices. Adrian speaking too low to make out the words. A longer silence. Then a sound she couldn't interpret. "He pulled it," Adrian said. His voice was entirely controlled, but she could hear underneath it something that was... She searched for the word relief was too small. Vindication was closer. It's there. The amended filing, the date stamp, the full documentation. "What's Salvatore's attorney doing?" she asked. "He's very carefully not looking at his client," Adrian said. And something in his voice told her that if he weren't in the middle of a high-stakes meeting with a man who had been trying to destroy his family for 6 months, that something might have become a laugh. "Stay calm," she said. "Let the silence do the work. Don't fill it." "I know," he said. "Adrian." "Yes. You've already won the meeting," she said. "Now make sure he knows it without making him feel cornered. A cornered man is more dangerous than a defeated one." A pause. "Agreed," he said. "Call me when it's done," she said. "Yes," he said, and hung up. She sat at her desk and listened to the quiet of her office and counted her own heartbeats for the next 47 minutes. Her phone rang at 11:01. "It's done," Adrian said. She exhaled, one long, controlled breath. "How did he take it?" "He's angry," Adrian said. "He'll be angry for a long time, but he left the room without the leverage he came in with, and without a single concession from this family." A pause. "He knows he miscalculated." "What happens next with him?" she asked. "He'll regroup," Adrian said. "Look for another approach, but he's lost the initiative and he knows it, and men like Victor Salvatore operate on initiative. Without it, they're..." He paused. "Human," she said. A brief silence. "Yes," he said quietly. "Human." She heard something in his voice that she had not heard before, a quality that was not relief exactly, but something in the same family. The sound of a person who had been braced for a very long time and had just for one moment let something down. "Go home," she said, "or wherever you go when something like this is finished." "I go back to work," he said. There was a slight dryness in it that was as close to humor as she had come from him. "Adrian." "Yes, you did it the right way," she said. "You went in there and you were exactly who you've been trying to be, and it worked." The silence on the other end of the line was the longest one she had ever heard from him. "Because of you," he said finally. "Because of you," she said firmly. "I handed you the tools. You had to walk into that room." A pause, and then so quietly she had to press the phone closer. "I want to see you." She closed her eyes. "Not today," she said. "Give me a few days." "All right," he said. "A few days." She sat for a long time after she hung up. The city was going about its business outside her window. Ordinary and indifferent, and entirely unconcerned with the fact that something inside her had just shifted in a way she was not sure was reversible. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. His voice was warm, the way Nathan's voice was always warm, and she held on to that warmth the way you hold on to something real when the ground around you isn't entirely stable. "I need to see you tonight," she said. A pause. "Okay," he said. "I'll be there." She hung up and looked at the ceiling. She thought about what her mother had said. The question is, which one has both? She was almost certain she knew the answer. She was also almost certain that knowing the answer and living it were two entirely different problems, and the harder one was still waiting for her. Nathan was already at her apartment when she got there. He had a key. She had given it to him 3 months ago, in that easy, unhurried way that things had developed between them, one small gesture at a time, building into the architecture of a shared life. He had used it maybe a dozen times, always with consideration, always texting ahead. Tonight, he was sitting on her couch with his coat still on, which told her he had arrived not long before her and hadn't settled in the way he usually did, hadn't made himself a drink or turned on the television, or done any of the small habitual things that people do when they're comfortable in a space. He was just sitting there waiting. She set her bag down. She sat in the chair across from him, the same configuration as 3 nights ago, which she noticed and suspected he did too. "You called me," he said. His voice was careful. "You never call me in the middle of a workday unless something happened." "Something happened," she said. "The Salvatore meeting was today. It went well. Adrian handled it the right way." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "That's not why you called me," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's not." He waited. Nathan was very good at waiting, a quality she had always loved about him. The patience of a man who understood that the most important things needed space to arrive. She had been rehearsing this on the drive home and thrown every version away. So she just said it plainly. "I'm in love with your brother." The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Nathan did not move. His face did not collapse or contort in the dramatic way that people's faces did in movies when they received news that broke something. He went very still, the same way the hallway had gone still 6 weeks ago, and she watched him take it in with the particular dignity of a man who had known this was coming and had chosen to face it with his eyes open. "I know," he said finally. Her throat tightened. "Nathan, I've known for a while," he said. Not accusing, just honest. "I think I knew before you did." He looked at his hands. "That's the thing about loving someone the way I love you. You pay attention. And I watched it happen, and I kept hoping I was wrong, and I wasn't." "I'm so sorry," she said. And she meant it in the full weight of the word, not the reflexive apology of social discomfort, but the genuine grief of having hurt someone who deserved better. "Don't apologize for what you feel," he said. He looked up at her. His eyes were, she had seen Nathan in many emotional states across 7 months, and she had never seen this particular configuration. Not anger, not devastation, something more complex, something that had passed through grief and was sitting in a very quiet place on the other side. "I told you I'd rather have the honest version. I meant it. I didn't look for this," she said. "I need you to know that." "I know that," he said immediately. "That's the thing about Adrian. You don't look for him. He's there, and then he's paying attention to you, and suddenly everything feels different." He paused. "I've watched it happen to other people my whole life. I just never thought—" He stopped. "You never thought it would happen to someone you loved," she said softly. "No," he said. "I didn't." She looked at him. This man who had cooked her dinner and remembered what she'd said in passing and loved her in the most uncomplicated, generous way she had ever been loved, and she felt the weight of what this cost him in her chest, like something physical. "You deserve someone who's entirely yours," she said. "Someone who doesn't have any of this pulling in another direction. You deserve the uncomplicated version." "Probably," he said. He almost smiled. Not fully, but almost. "You weren't uncomplicated from the beginning, if I'm being honest. You never did anything the easy way." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else entirely. "That's true." He stood up. He picked up his coat, which was already on. He had never really settled. Like some part of him had always been ready for this. "I need some time," he said. "Not forever, just time." "I know," she said. "Take whatever you need." He moved toward the door and then stopped, turned back and looked at her with those warm, open eyes that had been one of the first things she had ever loved about him. "Take care of him," he said. Quiet, almost steady. "He's not as solid as he looks. He never has been." She felt her eyes fill. She didn't let herself look away. "I will," she said. He nodded once, and he walked out. The door closed. She sat in the silence and let herself feel every bit of it. The grief of losing something real, the guilt of being the cause of it, the love she still felt for Nathan that hadn't disappeared, and probably wouldn't, and underneath all of it, like a current running below the surface of everything else, the truth she had finally said out loud. She sat there for a long time. Then she washed her face, made herself tea, and went to bed. She did not call Adrian that night. That was important. Whatever came next needed to arrive without the momentum of the day carrying it. It needed to be a clear, deliberate choice made in daylight, with a steady mind. She owed all three of them that much. Dominic DeLuca found out about Salvatore meeting's outcome before Adrian had a chance to tell him. That was the thing about the DeLuca organization. Information moved through it, the way water moved through limestone, finding every crack and fissure, arriving at its destination, by paths that were not always visible. By the time Adrian walked into his father's house that Friday evening, Dominic already knew the meeting had ended without violence, without concession, and without the decisive demonstration of family strength he had demanded. Isabella found out about the confrontation from Carla, of all people, Nathan's cousin, the Harvard lawyer who sat quiet at the dinner table and watched everything. Carla called her on Saturday morning, and her voice had the careful quality of someone delivering information they believed was necessary. "There was a conversation last night," Carla said, "between Adrian and my uncle. I need you to know about it because it's going to affect the work you're doing, and possibly more than that." "Tell me," Isabella said. "Dominic told Adrian he went into that meeting unarmed," Carla said. "His word. He told him that sending Salvatore home with his dignity intact was the same as sending him home with a victory, that a man like Salvatore only understands one language, and Adrian had just confirmed he wasn't willing to speak it." "What did Adrian say?" "He said his father was wrong," Carla said. "He said it calmly and directly and without qualification. I've never heard him say those exact words to my uncle in my life." Isabella straightened. "How did Dominic respond?" "He told Adrian that if he wasn't willing to lead this family the way it needed to be led, he needed to step down," Carla said. "And he needed to do it before Salvatore came back with something they couldn't handle with amended filings and documentation." The words landed heavily. "He wants Adrian to step down. He wants Adrian to be afraid of losing his position," Carla said, "which is different. My uncle has been using the threat of replacing him with Nathan for 30 years. What's different about last night is that Adrian didn't respond the way he always does." "What does he always do?" "He goes quiet," Carla said. "He absorbs it and goes quiet and adjusts and finds a way to give my uncle just enough to keep the peace." A pause. "Last night he didn't do that. He told my uncle that if he wanted to give the organization to Nathan, that was his choice to make. And then he left." Isabella was silent for a moment. "Is Nathan involved in this?" "Nathan doesn't want to run anything," Carla said flatly. "He never has. He's good at what he does precisely because he's not trying to prove anything to anyone." A pause. "But my uncle may not give him a choice if he decides he's done with Adrian." "What does Nathan say?" "I haven't talked to him yet this morning," Carla said. "I don't know how much he knows." A beat. "How much do you know about last night?" "About all of it." Isabella considered how much to say. "I know about the meeting. I know it went the way it needed to go. I know Dominic wasn't going to be satisfied with that regardless of the outcome." Carla was quiet for a moment. "You know Adrian well enough to have predicted his father's reaction." "I've been working with him for 5 weeks," Isabella said. "Is that all it is?" Carla asked. Not unkindly, just directly, the particular directness of a lawyer who had spent her career asking questions she already knew the answers to. "No," Isabella said. "It's not." A silence. "Nathan and I talked last night," Isabella said. "He knows." Carla exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Not judgment, not alarm. Just the sound of a person absorbing and recalibrating." "Okay. Then I need to tell you something else." "Tell me." "Salvatore isn't done," Carla said. "The meeting didn't just fail for him, it humiliated him. He went in expecting a surrender and left with nothing. That kind of humiliation for a man like that—" "He'll escalate," Isabella said. "He already has," Carla said. He reached out to 3 of the DeLuca organization's legitimate business partners yesterday afternoon. Not with leverage, with offers, better terms. Trying to peel away the relationships that make the legitimate side of the business viable. She paused. He's not going after the legal exposure anymore. He's going after the foundation Adrian's been building. Isabella felt the specific chill of understanding exactly how precise that attack was. He knows that the legitimate operations are the future, she said. He's not trying to destroy the empire. He's trying to destroy the part that makes the empire survivable. Yes, Carla said. And my uncle sees it as proof that Adrian's approach invited the attack. Adrian's approach was the only thing that prevented a worse one, Isabella said. Her voice was sharper than she intended. I know that, Carla said. You know that. Adrian knows that. Convincing Dominic DeLuca of it is a different problem. She was right, and they both knew it. Thank you for calling me, Isabella said. Don't let him do this alone, Carla said, and hung up. She called Adrian. He answered on the second ring, which for him was slightly slower than usual, which told her he had looked at the screen before deciding to pick up. I heard about last night, she said. Carla, he said. She's trying to help. I know, he said. He sounded like a man who had slept less than she had, which was saying something. How much did she tell you? Enough, Isabella said. Your father wants you to step down. He wants me to be afraid of stepping down, Adrian said. Those are different things. How different? She asked carefully. A pause. I spent most of last night figuring that out, he said. He's made that threat before. Every time I've done something that didn't fit the shape of what he built. Every time I've chosen patience over force. His voice was even, but she heard the exhaustion underneath it. The difference this time is that I realized sometime around 3 a.m. that I'm not afraid of it anymore. She absorbed that. What changed? The meeting on Friday, he said. Walking in there and doing it right, doing it the way I believed it should be done, not the way my father said it had to be done, and it working. A pause. For the first time I can remember, I made a significant decision, and it was entirely my own, and it was correct. And my father's opinion of it doesn't change that. She heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard before. Not defiance. Defiance had a heat to it. This was something cooler, more settled. The quality of a person who had found the ground under their feet after a very long time of testing it. He's going to push harder, she said. I know. Salvatore is moving on your business partners, she said. Carla told me. He's trying to dismantle the legitimate foundation. I know that too, Adrian said. I found out this morning. A pause. I need you to do something for me. What? The 3 companies that were in our original compliance work, he said. 2 of them are among the partners Salvatore approached. I need documentation, clear, comprehensive, demonstrating the value of the compliance restructuring and the legal protection it provides. Not for my attorneys, for the partners. I need them to see in terms they can understand that staying with the DeLuca organization's restructured operations is significantly safer for them than anything Salvatore is offering. She was already thinking through the structure of it. That's a retention argument, she said. You want me to build a case for why the legitimate side of what you've been building is their best option. Yes, he said. I can have it to you by Monday, she said. I need it by Sunday morning, he said. Then I can have it to you by Sunday morning, she said without missing a beat. A silence. Then, you haven't slept. She blinked. Excuse me, your voice, he said. You sound like someone who made it through the night without sleeping and is running on coffee and forward momentum. A pause. I know, because I sound the same way. She almost laughed. I'm fine. I know you're fine, he said. You're always fine. That's not what I said. She was quiet for a moment. Nathan came to my apartment last night, she said. A long pause. How did it go? The way it had to, she said. He's good, Adrian. He's handling it with more grace than most people would." "He always does," Adrian said. And the way he said it, the particular weight of someone who had spent his whole life watching his twin brother's goodness from the outside, landed in her chest in a way that was hard to describe. "He told me to take care of you," she said. The silence on the other end of the line was the kind that had mass. "He shouldn't have said that," Adrian said finally. His voice was slightly rough. "That's too—" He stopped. "That's Nathan," she said softly. "That's exactly who he is." She heard him exhale, just once. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They were quiet for a moment together in the particular tenderness of two people who both loved the same person and were holding that knowledge carefully between them. "Isabella," he said. "I know," she said. "Not yet. Sunday. Let me finish the documentation and then we'll talk." "All right," he said. "Sunday." She worked through Saturday and into Sunday morning with the focused, clean-burning energy that she had learned over the years was the most honest version of herself when the emotional landscape was complicated and the work was clear. The work was the thing she could trust. She built the documentation with the care of someone who understood that what she was constructing was not just a business argument. It was the architecture of a future. Evidence that the thing Adrian DeLuca had been trying to build for 12 years was real, sustainable, and worth protecting. She sent it to him at 7:43 Sunday morning with a message that said, only, "It's done. Read it before you talk to anyone." His response came 11 minutes later. "This is the best thing anyone has ever put in front of me professionally. Thank you." She stared at that for a moment. Then she typed back, "Come get it in person. We need to talk." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. 1 hour. She made coffee. She showered. She sat at her kitchen table and thought about everything she needed to say, and decided that the right approach, as it always was with important things, was simply to say it. He arrived in 53 minutes. She opened the door, and he was there, slightly less composed than his usual immaculate self, which on Adrian DeLuca manifested as the faint shadow of a night's insufficient sleep, and a quality in his eyes that was working closer to the surface than she was used to. He was wearing a dark gray sweater, rather than the structured jacket and shirt combination he was almost always in, and the informality of it was striking in the specific way that small changes in contained people always were. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at her with that measuring attention, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He said nothing. He just looked at her, waiting, giving her the first word completely. She loved that about him. She loved it precisely, and she was done pretending she didn't. "I talked to Nathan," she said. "I told him the truth. He knows." "I know," he said. "He called me this morning." She blinked. "He called you at 6:15, Adrian said. His voice was very careful. "He told me that he wasn't going to stand between something real." Those were his exact words. He paused. "He also told me that if I did anything to hurt you, he would make my life considerably more difficult, and he said it with enough specificity that I took him seriously." She felt something give way in her chest. A sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob landed somewhere in the middle. "That is so completely Nathan," she said. "Yes," Adrian said, and his voice on that word had something in it she hadn't heard before, grief and love and the complicated weight of being someone's twin, for 34 years of being shaped in the same space as another person and growing into something entirely different and loving that person anyway, across all the difference. She moved toward him. He went very still the way he had in the hallway 6 weeks ago, but this was a different kind of still. Not the stillness of someone choosing not to respond. The stillness of someone waiting to be certain they were reading what was in front of them correctly. "I'm not doing this because of the meeting or the work or any of the professional things," she said, stopping in front of him. "I'm doing this because you're the first person I've ever met who makes me feel like the full version of myself is the exact right amount." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face. That quality she had spent 6 weeks cataloging and never quite naming resolved finally into something clear. something she recognized. "You walked into my hallway," he said, "and you kissed me before you were afraid of me." He paused. "And everything since then has been significant," she said, using his word back at him. Something at the corner of his mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "Significant." He reached out and took her hand. Not the brief, measured contact of the first night when he had steadied her stumble and released her immediately. He took her hand and held it, his thumb tracing the same small pattern across her knuckles that Nathan's had traced across this same table what felt like a lifetime ago, and she recognized the gesture as something that lived in people who loved with their hands before they knew how to love with their words. "I don't know how to do this simply," he said. "I'm not a simple person." "I know," she said. "I don't need simple. My life is—" He paused. "Complicated. Still, even with everything I've been trying to change." "I've been inside your compliance documentation for 5 weeks," she said. "I have a fairly comprehensive understanding of how complicated your life is." That corner of his mouth, fuller this time. "And you're still here." "I'm still here," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. The focused, complete attention that she had come to understand was not a performance or a professional habit, but the truest expression of who he was. And then he said, "Okay." Just that. One word. The same way she had said it to him the first morning he had called her, when everything was still uncertain and she was agreeing to a conversation, not a life. This time it meant something different. She knew it. He knew it. And neither of them needed to say it out loud. The escalation from Salvatore came on Tuesday. It came not through the business channels she had been monitoring, not through the partners or the regulatory pathways or the financial pressure points he had been probing. It came through Nathan. Adrian called her at 2 in the afternoon. His voice was the controlled, precise calm that she now knew was the most dangerous register he had, the one that came out when something had happened that required every tool of self-management he possessed. "Salvatore's people approached Nathan this morning," he said. Her stomach dropped. "What did they want?" "They want Nathan to bring a claim against the DeLuca organization's restructuring," he said. "Specifically, they've been telling him that the compliance restructuring I've been doing with your help has been reclassifying assets in ways that reduced his share of the family holdings." A pause. "They want him to file a legal challenge. It would freeze the restructuring pending litigation." She felt the precision of it hit her like cold water. "It's not true," she said. The reclassification was transparent, and Nathan was notified at every stage through the family attorney. "I know it's not true," Adrian said. "Nathan knows it's not true." "Then what's the threat?" "The threat," Adrian said carefully, "is that Nathan might be angry enough at the current situation to be receptive to people offering him a reason to strike back." A pause. "Salvatore is betting that what happened with you with Nathan created enough fracture that Nathan might be willing to use it." She understood immediately. "He's trying to use the personal situation to create a legal weapon," she said. "Yes." "What did Nathan say to them?" "He told them to get out of his office," Adrian said. "And then he called me." She exhaled. "He called you." "He called me," Adrian confirmed, "to tell me what had happened and to let me know he wasn't interested in being used as a tool against his own family, regardless of anything personal." A pause. "He also said something else." "What?" "He said he'd been thinking about what Salvatore was actually doing, going after the legitimate operations, trying to peel away the partners, and now trying to create a legal freeze on the restructuring. He said it all pointed to the same thing." A pause. "Salvatore is afraid of what this family is becoming. He's not attacking the old empire. He's attacking the new one because the new one actually threatens him." Isabella sat with that for a moment. Then, "Nathan's right." "I know," Adrian said. "Nathan is almost always right about the things that matter. He just usually lets other people say it first." She heard the affection in that complicated, layered, the particular love of someone who had spent a lifetime being the harder version of the same person and knowing it. "What's your next move?" she asked. "I need to accelerate the partner retention documentation you built," he said. "I need to get in front of those relationships personally this week, not through intermediaries, not through attorneys. Me in the room with the documentation having the conversation." A pause. "And I need my father." She blinked. "Dominic?" "I need him in the room with me," Adrian said. "Not because I need his permission. Because the partners have been with this family for decades, and most of that relationship is with him. And if he's visibly unified with what I'm doing, it removes the last argument Salvatore has." "Can you get him there?" she asked. A silence. "That's the question," he said. "Have you talked to him since Friday night?" "No," he said. "He's been waiting for me to come to him." "And you've been waiting to be ready," she said. "Yes." She thought about Dominic DeLuca, dark, formidable, a man who had built an empire on principles he believed in, with an absolute conviction that made him impossible to argue with, and occasionally impossible to protect people from. She thought about the faint movement at the corner of his mouth when she had said, "I never am." "He respects directness," she said. "He proved that the first night. You don't need to come to him with deference. You need to come to him with the argument." "He won't want to hear the argument," Adrian said. "He'll want to hear that I've reconsidered." "Then make the argument sound like a reconsideration," she said. "Not of your position of the strategy. Give him something he can agree with without losing face. Tell him that after Friday, you've reconsidered the approach to Salvatore, and you believe the next phase requires a different kind of demonstration of family strength." She paused. "One that he has to be present for." A silence. "That's," Adrian started. "Compliance work," she said. "Making the structure work for the people inside it, not against them." A pause that was different from his other pauses, warmer somehow. "You're very good at this," he said. "I know," she said. She could hear the smile in his silence. She was getting good at that. "I'll call him tonight," Adrian said. "Let me know what he says," she said. "Isabella," he said. "Yes. Thank you," he said. "For all of it. The documentation Sunday morning, the—" He paused. "Everything." "That's what I'm here for," she said. "Not just professionally," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "Not just professionally." Tiens. Dominic DeLuca agreed to the meetings. She found out from Adrian the next morning a text at 6:45 that said only, "He's in, Wednesday and Thursday." All three partners. She sat at her kitchen table and read it twice. Then she typed back, "What changed his mind?" The response came 2 minutes later. "I told him Salvatore was afraid of what we're building. He said any man worth fearing should be afraid of us. I told him that was exactly right, and I needed him to show them that." She stared at her phone. He had given his father the argument in a language Dominic understood. Not the language of compliance or restructuring or legitimate business operations. The language of strength. The language of being something that other powerful men feared. He had translated correctly. She typed back, "That was exactly right." His response, "I had a good teacher. Good boy." She set the phone down and looked at the ceiling and let herself feel for a moment the particular satisfaction of watching someone become more completely who they were capable of being. Wednesday's first partner meeting happened at 11 in the morning in the offices of Halloran Property Management, a family-owned firm that had been doing business with the DeLuca organization for 22 years. Isabella wasn't there. She had prepared Adrian for it, the way she prepared everything, with thorough specific documentation and an hour-long conversation the night before, during which she had walked him through every likely question, every possible objection, every point of genuine concern that a business partner would have when faced with a powerful competitor's offer. He called her when it was done. 2 hours, he said. Dominic spoke for the first 40 minutes. What did he say? He told them that the DeLuca family had been protecting business relationships in this city for 35 years, Adrian said. He told them that what Salvatore was offering was a transaction, not a partnership, and that the difference between those two things was the difference between having an ally and having a landlord. A pause. Then he handed the floor to me. And I walked them through your documentation, he said. The compliance restructuring the legal protection framework, the specific ways the legitimate operations are now structured to be genuinely sustainable rather than simply functional. A pause. They asked a lot of questions. What kind of questions? Honest ones, he said. The kind that meant they were actually considering it rather than having already decided. He paused. Their senior partner asked me directly why I was doing this, the restructuring the compliance work. He said it didn't look like what he expected from this family. She felt her attention sharpen. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, Adrian said. I told him that I've been trying to build something I could be proud of. That the old way worked for a long time, and it isn't the right way anymore. That the organizations that survive the next 20 years are the ones that can operate in the light. He paused. And then my father, who I did not brief on this answer, said, and I am quoting exactly, "My son is right. I built something that lasted. He's building something that will outlast me. That's worth more." Isabella went completely still. Dominic said that, she said. In front of the Halloran senior partners, yes, Adrian said. She absorbed this. What it had cost Dominic DeLuca, a man who had never been wrong about anything in his own estimation, who had built an empire on the certainty of his own judgment, to say that to his son in front of witnesses. She didn't have a word large enough for it. How did you respond? She asked. I didn't, Adrian said. I looked at him for a moment, and then I turned back to the Halloran partners and said that the documentation would speak for itself, and we shook hands, and they're staying. A pause. I think if I'd said anything in that moment, one of us would have said something wrong, so I said nothing. That was the right call, she said. Yeah, he said. His voice had that quality again, the one she associated with things he was carrying at significant personal cost, except this time it was moving in a different direction. Not weight, something closer to release. Are you all right? She asked. I've been waiting 34 years for my father to say something like that, he said. Quiet? Simple. Just the fact of it stated plainly by a man who had learned very young that simple statements of difficult truths were the most honest form of courage. He stopped. I don't have a word for what I am right now. You don't need one, she said. A silence. No, he agreed. I don't. They were quiet together for a moment across the city, connected by the thin fact of a phone line and the considerably less thin fact of everything that had accumulated between them across the past 6 weeks. Thursday's meeting, she said eventually, because they both needed something practical to come back to. The second partner. I know, he said. I've read your notes 3 times. 4 would be better, she said. That silence that might have been the beginning of a laugh. 4 it is, he said. She smiled at nothing in particular. Call me when Thursday's done. I'll call you before that, he said. It was said easily without hesitation, like a simple statement of fact. Like calling her was something that didn't need to be justified with a reason anymore. Okay, she said. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of her office. Outside Boston was going about its November business cold. Ordinary, entirely unconcerned with the fact that something was being built a few miles away that had taken 12 years to get to this moment. She thought about Adrian in that meeting room, saying, I've been trying to build something I could be proud of. She thought about Dominic DeLuca, saying that's worth more in front of witnesses. She thought about what it meant to watch someone become more completely themselves, not arrive at a destination, not transform into something unrecognizable, but shed the specific weight of who they had been required to be and find the shape of who they actually were. She had known from the first time she sat across from him in a restaurant downtown, with a compliance file between them, that Adrian DeLuca was more than what his name meant. She just hadn't known then how far more would reach. Thursday's meeting went well. Friday's partner, the third and most significant, a real estate firm that controlled 15% of the DeLuca organization's legitimate revenue, went better. By Friday evening, all three partners had confirmed their commitment to the restructured relationship. Salvatore's approach had been declined by all of them. Adrian came to her apartment that evening. He didn't call first. He texted a single line. "It's done. Is it all right if I come?" She typed back, "Yes." When she opened the door, he was holding 2 cups of coffee from the place around the corner that she had mentioned once 3 weeks ago was the only place in Boston that made it the way she liked it. He had remembered. Of course he had. She took the coffee and stepped back to let him in, and he came in, and they sat across from each other at her kitchen table with the city sounds below them and the particular quiet between them that had become one of the most familiar things in her life. "It's over?" she asked. "This part," he said. "Salvatore isn't done. He'll find another approach. But the foundation is solid now, the partners, the documentation, the compliance framework. He can't dismantle it the way he planned. And your father." Adrian looked at his coffee. "He called me this morning. He said—" He stopped, started again. "He said he was proud of me." She looked at him. The way he said it carefully, like it was something fragile, he was still deciding how to hold. "When was the last time he said that?" she asked. "He hasn't," Adrian said. "Not to me. Not once in 34 years. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that was adequate. So she just held the moment with him, the way you hold difficult things with people, not trying to fix them, or explain them, or make them smaller, just being present with the full weight of them. After a moment, he looked up at her. "I keep thinking about something you said," he said. "Weeks ago. That first meeting at the restaurant. You said your job was to convince people that the structure exists to protect them, not restrict them." "I remember," she said. "That's what you did for this family," he said. "Not just the documentation, the whole thing." He paused. "You made us understand that the structure we were building wasn't a constraint. It was a foundation." She looked at him steadily. "You already knew that," she said. "You've been building it for 12 years. You just needed someone to see it clearly enough to put it in language everyone could read." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand the way he had on Sunday, simply without performance, like it was just the natural place for his hand to be. "Stay," he said. Not an instruction, not a plea, just the word offered. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He nodded. And outside, Boston turned cold and dark and went about the ordinary business of a Friday night, entirely indifferent to the fact that in a kitchen in the South End, a man who had spent 34 years being the complicated one was finally, for the first time, simply sitting still. 3 months after the Friday evening, Adrian sat at Isabella's kitchen table and simply stayed. The DeLuca organization looked different enough that people who had known it for 20 years were starting to notice. Not dramatically different. Not the kind of transformation that announced itself. The kind of change that happened the way rivers change landscape, incrementally, persistently, through the sustained pressure of water finding its level. The kind you only recognized when you looked back and realized the terrain was no longer what it had been. The Harborview amended filing had closed cleanly. The 3-partner relationships held. The compliance frameworks Isabella had built were being implemented by Diane and a small team that Adrian had quietly assembled over the past 8 weeks. People who understood that the work they were doing was not administrative, but foundational. That they were building the infrastructure of something that intended to last. Victor Salvatore had gone quiet, not gone quiet. There was a difference, and everyone in Adrian's orbit understood it. A man like Salvatore didn't retire from a grudge. He regrouped. He waited. He watched for the moment when the thing that had beaten him showed a crack. But the crack he was looking for wasn't appearing. And as the weeks accumulated, there were signs, subtle, carried through back channels, that Adrian monitored with the same focused attention he brought to everything that Salvatore's own operation was experiencing. The kind of internal instability that happened when a leader's credibility was tested and found wanting. The failure to neutralize the DeLuca restructuring had cost him. The partners he had approached and failed to peel away were talking to each other. The story of what had happened in that meeting room. Adrian DeLuca walking in without a weapon, except the truth, and walking out with the leverage, was circulating in the specific careful way that stories circulated in this world. It was making people think differently about what strength actually looked like. That was perhaps the thing Isabella had not entirely anticipated when she started this work. She had understood from the beginning that Adrian was trying to build something legitimate and lasting. She had understood the compliance value, the legal protection, the business logic. She had not fully understood that the way he chose to fight Salvatore with intelligence instead of intimidation would itself become a kind of statement. That in a world where power had always been demonstrated through force, choosing a different demonstration was its own form of power. And that people were watching. She was at the DeLuca offices on a Tuesday morning in January when she felt it most clearly. She was finishing the final documentation review with Diane, the last piece of the original compliance mandate, a clean, comprehensive record that would withstand any regulatory scrutiny, when Adrian's assistant knocked and said that 3 men from the Callahan organization were in the lobby. Isabella knew the name. Boston's other significant family operation, older than the DeLucas, more conservative, with a complicated history of keeping their distance from other organizations and their own counsel. She looked at Diane. Diane looked back at her with the expression of someone who understood that the Callahan organization did not visit people. People visited them. "Send them up," Adrian said over the intercom. She finished her documentation review while the meeting happened in Adrian's office 20 feet away. She could not hear the conversation through the closed door, but she could read the shape of the day around it, the particular quality of attention in the office, the way people moved more quietly than usual, the slight recalibration of energy that happened when something significant was present. Adrian came to find her 40 minutes later. He leaned in the doorway of the conference room where she was working. She looked up. "The Callahan organization wants to talk," he said. About whether there's a model here that could apply to their operation," he said. His voice was entirely even. But she had been reading him for 3 months, and she could see underneath the evenness the thing that was working through him, not quite surprise, but something in its family. The quality of a person watching something happen that they had hoped for long enough that hoping had started to feel more like imagination than expectation. She set down her pen. "They want to restructure," she said. "They want to know if it's possible," he said. "They want to see the documentation. They want to understand what it took." He paused. Callahan Sr. came himself. He's 71 years old, and he hasn't left his office for a formal meeting in 4 years. She absorbed that. "Adrian," she said. "I know," he said quietly. She looked at him across the conference table. 3 months of watching him work. 3 months of building something together in that particular way that 2 people build things when they are both very good at what they do and are doing it in the same direction. 3 months of understanding and finer resolution who this man was beneath everything that had been layered on top of him. "This is what 12 years of work looks like," she said, "right there in your lobby." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Come meet him," he said. "Me." "You built the framework," he said. "You're the one who can explain it." She raised an eyebrow. "You want me to walk into a meeting with the Callahan patriarch and pitch compliance restructuring?" "Yes," he said simply. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her documentation folder, stood up, and said, "Lead the way." Patrick Callahan was 71 years old and looked like a man who had spent those years acquiring a very specific kind of knowledge about what people were made of and what they were likely to do under pressure. He shook her hand with the directness of someone who had long ago stopped performing courtesy and only practiced it when he meant it. "You're the compliance consultant," he said. "I am," she said. "You're also more than that," he said. Not as an accusation, as an observation. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I'm also more than that." He looked at her for a moment with that assessing attention. Then he looked at Adrian. "Smart," he said. "I know," Adrian said. She walked Patrick Callahan and his two associates through the framework for 90 minutes. She did not soften it or simplify it or adjust it for palatability. She showed them exactly what it was: the full scope of the documentation, the regulatory architecture, the specific ways the legitimate operations were structured to be genuinely sustainable. The places where it had been hard. The places where Dominic DeLuca had had to be brought along. The Harbor View problem, and exactly how it had been resolved. She told them the truth, which was that the process was difficult and slow, and required the people inside the organization to genuinely commit to it, not just tolerate it. And Patrick Callahan, 71 years old and 4 years out of formal meetings, sat across from her and listened to every word. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My grandson is 30 years old," he said. "He's the one who should be running this operation in 10 years. He keeps telling me the old way isn't going to hold." He paused. "I keep telling him he doesn't understand what keeps this family safe." "He's right. And so are you," Isabella said. "The old way kept you safe in the old world. The world changed. The question is whether the safety changes with it or whether the safety becomes the risk." Callahan looked at her steadily. "You're saying the thing I built is now a liability." "I'm saying the way it's structured creates exposure that didn't exist 15 years ago," she said. "And that there's a way to protect what matters without carrying the weight of what doesn't anymore." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "When can you start?" She looked at Adrian. Adrian looked back at her with that thing in his face that she had finally completely named. She had taken 3 months to find the exact word for what she saw in him when he looked at her like that. The word was home. "We'll be in touch by end of week," Adrian said. The Callahan conversation was not the last one. By February, 2 other organizations had reached out to the DeLuca offices quietly through channels with the careful indirection of people who wanted information before they wanted visibility. Adrian handled each inquiry with the same patient precision he brought to everything, and Isabella built documentation packages that were adapted to each situation's specific needs, and Diane's compliance team began expanding to handle the volume. Dominic DeLuca, who had spent 40 years building an empire on the principles of his generation, watched all of this from a position that was new to him. He watched from beside his son. It had not happened overnight. It had not happened in a single conversation or a single dramatic moment of capitulation. It had happened the way the river changed the landscape incrementally through sustained pressure, through the accumulation of evidence that the thing Adrian was building was real and was working and was making the family more powerful, not less. The Thursday that crystallized it for Isabella was a Thursday in late February. She was in the DeLuca offices reviewing the Callahan documentation when she heard Dominic's voice in the hallway. He had taken to coming in on Thursdays, never announced, never formally scheduled, always with the ease of a man who had walked into this building 10,000 times and saw no reason to change that. He stopped in the doorway of the conference room. He looked at the documentation spread across the table. "How much longer on the Callahan scope?" he asked. She looked up. 3 weeks for the initial assessment. Maybe 5 for a framework recommendation. He nodded. He looked at the files for a moment. "Gerald Foss," he said. She met his eyes carefully. "The attorney who made the Harbor View filing errors. He worked for this family for 20 years and I never saw it coming," Dominic said. "A man I trusted." He paused. "You saw it in 5 days. I was looking for it," she said. "You weren't. That's not a failure of judgment. It's a failure of structure." He looked at her steadily. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's an accurate one," she said. "Which is the same thing when the accuracy is in your favor." Something moved in his expression, that same almost invisible recalibration she had seen the first night when he had decided who she was. "You don't give ground, you don't have to," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." He was quiet for a moment. "My son was right about you," he said. It was said plainly without warmth, performance with the simple directness of a man speaking truth as statement rather than gift. From the beginning, he was right. She held his gaze. "He's right about more than people give him credit for," she said. Dominic DeLuca looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded once the particular nod she had come to understand was his version of a complete sentence, and walked back down the hallway. She sat for a moment in the quiet he left behind. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. Nathan came back into the orbit in March. Not dramatically. Not with any of the ceremony that the situation might have suggested. He came back the way he did most things, with the quiet ease of a man who had taken the time he needed and arrived when he was ready without requiring anything of the people around him to make the arrival comfortable. He called Isabella on a Wednesday afternoon. "I want to have dinner," he said. "The three of us." She was quiet for a moment. "Nathan, not because it's complicated," he said. "Because you're both people I love, and I'm not interested in a version of my life where that requires maintaining two separate orbits forever." He paused. "I've had 4 months. I'm ready." She told Adrian that evening. He was quiet for longer than usual. "He's serious," he said finally. "Not a question." "He's Nathan," she said. "He means everything he says." Another pause. "When?" "Saturday," she said. "His choice of restaurant." Saturday came, and they went, and it was not easy exactly. Nothing about 3 people in that particular configuration could be entirely easy. But it was honest, which was the thing Nathan had always insisted on, and the thing that made him in the particular way that mattered most, the best of them. He hugged Isabella when she arrived. He shook Adrian's hand and held it a second, and something passed between them in that handshake that she did not try to interpret, because it was theirs 34 years of being formed in the same space of loving each other across all the difference of knowing each other in the complete, unsentimental way that only siblings can. They ordered. They talked. Nathan asked about the Callahan scope and genuinely listened to the answer. Asked 2 questions that were sharp and relevant, and made a suggestion about the documentation structure that was Isabella acknowledged without trying to hide it a good one. Adrian acknowledged it the same way. "You should have gone into compliance," Isabella told Nathan. "I don't like paperwork," Nathan said. And the ease of it, the return to something familiar, the warmth that had always been Nathan's most natural state settled around the table like something exhaled. It was later over dessert that Nathan said the thing she had not expected. "I've been seeing someone," he said. He said it the way he said difficult things, straightforwardly, without build-up, giving it enough air to breathe without dramatizing it. "Her name is Claire. She's a teacher. She's—" He paused, and something moved in his expression that Isabella recognized immediately and completely, because she had seen it on her own face in her own mirror, and she knew exactly what it meant. "She's the right one," Isabella said softly. Nathan looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I think she might be." She reached across the table and took his hand. He let her and squeezed once. Across the table, Adrian was looking at his brother with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something entirely unguarded. Something that on any other man she might have called the look of someone who has been carrying guilt and has just had it lifted slowly by the simple grace of someone else's happiness. "I want to meet her," Adrian said. Nathan looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "Yes," Adrian said. Nathan nodded slowly. A smile worked its way onto his face, the real one, the easy one, the one she had fallen for 7 months ago in a different life. "Okay," he said. "I'll set it up." They finished dinner. They walked out into the March cold together, the 3 of them, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the particular way of people who have arrived somewhere new and are taking a moment to locate themselves in it. Nathan hugged her. He kissed her cheek. "Be happy," he said against her hair. Simple. Meant completely. "You too," she said. He shook Adrian's hand again. This time they held it longer, and she heard Nathan say quietly, "Take care of things." And Adrian say equally quietly, "I will." And she understood that this was not about her. It was older than that. It was the particular shorthand of two people who had grown up in the same storm and developed their own language for what they owed each other. Nathan walked to his car. She and Adrian stood on the sidewalk. "He's going to be all right," she said. "He was always going to be all right," Adrian said. "He's built that way." He said it without any complicated feeling underneath, just love, clean and simple, the way Nathan himself operated. She slipped her hand into his. He held on. The night that Salvatore made his final move came in April on a Wednesday that had been entirely ordinary until 7:45 in the evening. Isabella was at her desk when Adrian called, and she knew from the first syllable that particular compressed quality, the controlled calm dialed to its highest register, that something had broken. "He went to the state regulatory office," Adrian said. "He filed a formal complaint alleging that the Harborview amended filing was fraudulent, that it was a retroactive falsification designed to cover intentional misconduct." She felt the floor of the situation drop. "He can't prove that," she said immediately. "The documentation is—" "I know," Adrian said. "The documentation is clean. You built it clean. But a formal complaint triggers a mandatory investigation, and a mandatory investigation takes time. And during that time, the Callahan conversations freeze, the partner relationships go under scrutiny, and every legitimate operation we've been building gets treated as suspect by default." A pause. "He can't win. But he can make winning cost more than we have." She understood it instantly, the precision of it. This was not Salvatore making a legal argument he expected to prevail. This was Salvatore using the regulatory process as a weapon not to win, but to damage. To create enough noise and disruption that the thing Adrian had been building would be buried under the weight of defending itself. "He found a regulator," she said. "Someone who would accept the filing. Someone he has a relationship with." Adrian confirmed. "We're finding out the specifics now." "Who else knows?" "My attorneys. You. My father." A pause. Dominic's first response was to reach for the old playbook. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we had 48 hours before the investigation officially opened and I wanted to use them correctly," Adrian said. "He asked me to define correctly. I told him I'd show him. What do you need from me?" "Everything," he said. "Every piece of documentation on the Harborview process, not just the amended filing, but the full reconstruction. The original errors, the identified cause, the correction process, the dates, the chain of documentation. I need a package that makes the complaint not just dismissible, but obviously dismissible. Something so comprehensive that the investigator looks at the complaint and looks at our response and understands that the only fraudulent element in this situation is the person who filed it." "Give me tonight," she said. "You'll have what you need from my end in 30 minutes, he said. She was already opening her files. "Adrian." "Yes." "He's doing this because he's out of other options," she said. "This is the last thing he has. That means it's going to feel like the most dangerous moment, but it's actually the beginning of the end of him." A silence. "Explain that." "A man who has real power doesn't use regulators," she said. "A man who uses regulators is trying to convert borrowed authority into damage because his own isn't enough anymore. It's the move of someone who has already lost and is trying to make the loss expensive." She paused. "We don't just respond to this complaint. We respond to it in a way that makes it the last complaint he files." She heard something settle in him. "What do you need from me to do that?" "Complete transparency," she said. "Everything. The Gerald Foss errors, the original filing problems, the full scope of what was wrong before I started. All of it. We don't give them a partial picture they can fill in with suspicion. We give them a complete picture that makes suspicion impossible. That means acknowledging the original problems on record," he said. The problems that were corrected before any complaint existed, and that the correction is already filed, she said. Acknowledging them isn't weakness. It's the difference between an organization that identified and fixed its own mistakes and an organization that hid them until forced. Those are two completely different regulatory profiles. Another pause. You want us to lead with everything that was wrong, he said. I want us to lead with everything that was wrong and everything we did about it before anyone made us, she said. There's no story Salvatore can tell about fraudulent cover-up if we've already told the honest story first. The silence that followed was longer than usual. That's going to require my father to agree to disclose things he's never made explicit on record, Adrian said. I know, she said. Can you get him there? A pause. Tonight. In the next 3 hours, she said. I need to know what we're working with before I can build the response package. Give me an hour, he said. He called back in 43 minutes. My father said yes, he said. His voice had a quality she had not heard from him in all the months she had known him. Something that was not quite disbelief, closer to the sound of a person who has spent a very long time standing at a window and has just watched a door open. He agreed to full disclosure. He said, Adrian stopped, started again. He said that if the choice was between what he built and what I'm building, he was choosing what I'm building, and that he'd put his name on whatever I needed him to. She pressed her hand flat against her desk, feeling the solid surface of it, grounding herself in the specific reality of this moment, which was not a small one. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady. Then let's build something that ends this. She worked through the night. At 2 a.m, Adrian was still on the phone, not constantly but checking in every hour, delivering additional documentation from his end, answering her questions about the original Harborview timeline with the precise recall of a man who had known for years this day would eventually come and had kept every detail stored against the need. At 3:45, she sent him a 47-page response package. He called her immediately. Read it, she said. 12 minutes of silence. She knew he was reading it the way he read everything completely thoroughly from the beginning. This is going to close the complaint, he said. Yes, she said. It goes further than that, he said. The section documenting the pattern of Salvatore's approach. The vendor contacts the partner, offers the regulatory filing as a coordinated campaign of bad faith interference. It does, she said. I included it because it's true, and because it's documented, and because if the investigator is doing their job, they're going to want to understand why this complaint exists. We give them that answer before they have to ask. He's going to know this is coming, Adrian said. He's going to know it 10 seconds after this lands with the investigator, she said, and he's going to understand what it means. What does it mean? He asked. It means we're not just defending, she said. We're making a record, and the record shows a pattern of interference by a competitor using regulatory channels as a weapon. That's not just a dismissal of the complaint. That's the beginning of his exposure. A silence. You went after him, Adrian said. Quiet, with something underneath it that she couldn't immediately name. I protected you, she said. There's a difference. Another silence, warmer than the last. Get some sleep, he said. When it's filed, she said. Isabella. When it's filed, she said again. The filing went in at 8:14 in the morning. The complaint was dismissed 17 days later. Not quietly, the dismissal came with a notation from the investigating office that the complaint appeared to be part of a pattern of interference, and that the matter had been referred to the State Ethics Board for review of the filing itself. Victor Salvatore did not make another move against the De Luca organization. Not then. Not in the weeks that followed. The quiet that had surrounded him before became a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of a man regrouping, but the quiet of a man who had played his last card and was sitting with the consequences. Dominic De Luca had his name on 47 pages of complete, transparent organizational disclosure. His name was on a document that described in precise and honest terms the problems that had existed and the steps taken to correct them. It was not the document of a man protecting a legacy. It was the document of a man choosing a future over a reputation. He never said anything about it directly. He did not discuss it, or revisit it, or seek acknowledgement for the choice he had made. He simply went about the business of being the DeLuca patriarch in the revised landscape of what the DeLuca organization was becoming, with the settled manner of a man who had made a decision and was not in the habit of questioning his own decisions. But one morning in May, he stopped in the hallway of the DeLuca offices outside the conference room where Isabella was working, and he said, "Miss Romano?" She looked up. "Mr. DeLuca." He looked at the documentation spread across the table. "That 47 pages," he said. She waited. "It needed to be done a long time ago," he said. Just that. Facing forward, not quite meeting her eyes, the particular posture of a man making an acknowledgement that cost him something and was choosing to make it anyway. "Yes," she said simply. "But it's done now." He looked at her. The dark eyes. The assessment that never quite stopped. "Adrian's right about you," he said for the second time. And this time it landed differently, not as the observation of a man deciding who someone was, but as the statement of a man who had decided some time ago and was simply confirming it out loud. He walked on. She looked at the hallway he had disappeared down and thought about all the ways a person could change suddenly in dramatic moments, or slowly in the accumulated weight of choosing differently, one choice at a time, until the person you were becoming was more real than the person you had been. The evening Adrian asked her the question she had been carrying for 6 months happened on a night in late May that was warm enough to remind Boston it was capable of warmth, the city exhaling after a long winter with the particular relief of somewhere that earns its springs. They were at her apartment, their pattern now the natural rhythm of two people who had stopped needing to negotiate the ordinary details of being in each other's lives. He had cooked, which he did occasionally, and well, with the focused precision he brought to everything, including, she had discovered the making of pasta from scratch at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. They had eaten. The dishes were done. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop and a half glass of wine working through the Callahan scope review that was due at the end of the week, and he was across the table reading something, and the silence between them was the most comfortable silence she had ever lived in. He set down what he was reading. She looked up. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. He looked at her with that complete, focused attention, all of it. Nothing held back the full weight of the way he paid attention, which was the most honest thing about him. "If you knew who I was that night," he said, "in the hallway, if you had known my name, what it meant, everything that came with it, would you have walked toward me?" She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the question honestly the way he deserved. Not the comfortable answer, the true one. "No," she said. Something moved in his expression. He waited. "Because I would have been afraid of the name," she said. "I would have adjusted. I would have kept the distance that everyone keeps around you. I would have been polite and careful, and I would have walked past you without ever knowing there was anything worth knowing." She held his gaze. "And I would have missed everything." He was very still. "The mistake," she said, "was the only honest thing that happened that night. Because it was the only moment where I wasn't adjusting for who you were supposed to be. I just walked toward you like you were a person. And you were." He reached across the table and took her hand. She turned her palm up and held his the way you hold something you have stopped being afraid of losing because you understand finally that it belongs. "I've spent 34 years being what that name required," he said. The intelligence, the containment, the weight of being Dominic DeLuca's firstborn in a family where firstborn meant something specific and heavy. He paused. "And then you walked into my hallway and kissed me before you were afraid of me. And I spent the next 6 months discovering that someone not being afraid of you is a completely different experience than anything I knew how to prepare for." She squeezed his hand. "What kind of experience?" she asked. He looked at her. "The kind where you start to believe that who you're trying to become is actually possible," he said. Because someone is looking at you like it's already true. The kitchen was very quiet. It is already true, she said. I've been watching it for 6 months. The Callahan meetings, the partner retention, the 47 pages. Your father in this hallway 3 times a week coming into an office he turned over to you because he trusts what you're doing. She looked at him steadily. You're not trying to become something, Adrian. You already are it. You just haven't caught up to yourself yet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, stay. And this time, it was not the word from a Friday night in November, tentative and offered. It was something more than that. It was a question and a declaration in the same words said by a man who had stopped being afraid of what he needed. She looked back at him across the kitchen table. This man who had caught her arm in a hallway when she stumbled, who had called her the morning after, because efficiency was not the only reason, who had walked into a meeting room armed with the truth and proved it was enough, who had put his family's complete history on 47 pages and signed his name to it, who had spent 12 years becoming something worth being and needed someone to see it before he could see it himself. I'm not going anywhere, she said. The same words as Sunday morning in November. The same truth. They had been true that day and every day since, and would be true tomorrow. He brought her hand to his mouth, pressed his lips to her knuckles. Not a gesture of romance, something quieter and more permanent than that. The gesture of someone who had been very alone for a long time and had finally simply stopped being alone. 6 months later, the DeLuca organization was not the same. The legitimate operations were the primary operations. The compliance frameworks were embedded deep enough to be structural rather than procedural. The Callahan scope had been completed and was being implemented. 2 other organizations had begun conversations. Dominic DeLuca came to the offices on Thursdays and stayed through lunch and sometimes through the afternoon, sitting in meetings he had not called and contributing to conversations he had not initiated, and doing it with the particular grace of a man who had found a way to be present in something he had helped create without needing to control it. Nathan and Claire had dinner with Adrian and Isabella in April, and it was not easy in the theatrical sense, but real. The particular realness of 4 adults who cared about the right things sitting around a table and choosing to be generous with each other. Nathan and Adrian argued about a real estate development decision for 45 minutes, and both of them were right about different parts of it. And neither of them conceded the parts they were right about. And Isabella and Claire watched this and exchanged a look across the table that was the beginning of a friendship. Marco was working for a small nonprofit in Cambridge, managing operations for a youth program. Adrian had quietly arranged the position. He visited the offices occasionally and sat with Diane and learned the compliance systems he had once helped undermine. And he was doing it with the earnest determination of someone who understood the specific weight of what they owed. Victor Salvatore was quiet. His operation was smaller than it had been. The ethics board review of the regulatory complaint was ongoing, and the process of that slow, procedurally grinding, impossible to rush was doing its own work. Isabella had an office in the DeLuca building now. Not because she had been absorbed into the organization. She maintained her independent practice, her other clients, the professional independence she had built and had no intention of dismantling. But because there was enough ongoing work to justify the permanence, and because Adrian had asked, and because she had said yes, she was at that desk on a Thursday morning in October, exactly 1 year after a cold evening, when she had stood in front of a mansion door and told her hands to stop trembling when Adrian appeared in the doorway. She looked up. He was holding 2 coffees from the place around the corner. She smiled. He set one in front of her and sat across the desk, the configuration that had become theirs, across hundreds of mornings. 2 people who worked well together, having discovered that working well together was not the least of the reasons to choose someone. Callahan's son called this morning, he said. The grandson, she said. The 30-year-old. He wants to meet about expanding the scope. Second phase. He paused. He's bringing 2 people from their operations team. Good, she said. I'll prepare an agenda. There's something else, he said. She looked at him. My father, he said. He asked me last night if I was going to ask you to marry him. The office went very still. She looked at Adrian steadily. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was between me and Isabella," he said. His voice was even, but his eyes were doing that thing, the complete unguarded attention, all the way open, nothing held back. "And," she said. He reached into his jacket. He set a ring on the desk between them. Simple, precise, exactly what she would have chosen if she'd been asked, which she understood, knowing him was not an accident. "I'm asking," he said. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. This man who had caught her when she stumbled, who had called her for reasons that were never only efficiency, who had chosen intelligence over intimidation and truth over convenience, and the harder right thing over the easier wrong one, every single time, for as long as she had known him, for as long as he had been trying to be someone worth being. She picked up the ring. She put it on her own hand and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. "You could have asked differently," she said. "Something more I don't know. Scenic." "I know," he said, "but this is where we actually are. Your desk, Thursday morning, coffee." He paused. It felt right. She looked at him. "It is right," she said. "Is that a yes?" he asked. And for the first time in all the months she had known him, there was something in his voice that was not certain. Something that was genuinely asking. The vulnerability of a man who had learned late that some things you could not control with preparation and precision, that some things you simply had to ask and wait. "Yes," she said, simply, completely. He let out a breath, one long, quiet exhale, the sound of someone who had been holding something carefully for a very long time and had just been allowed to set it down. He reached across the desk and took her hand, the one with the ring on it. Held it the way he always held things he intended to keep. Outside Boston went about its October morning with complete indifference to what had just happened in an office on the 14th floor. The city did not adjust for it. The world did not pause. But inside that office, between two people who had found each other through a mistake in a hallway and built something true from it, something permanent had just been said out loud for the first time. An accidental kiss had brought them to the hallway. Everything else, the choice, the work, the truth, the 47 pages, the Thursday mornings, the man becoming more completely himself because someone had seen who he was before he was afraid of being. All of that had been entirely on purpose. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.